At the opulent charity gala, my eldest son approached, tossed $50 at me and sneered, "You don't belong here. Get out." His two younger siblings stood behind him, mocking me as if I were trash. They have no idea that I am the true architect behind this $2.5 billion empire. 4 years ago, they abandoned me when I went broke saving them. Now they storm into my office demanding a 65% stake in the business I rebuilt. I watch in silence. Every word they utter is a step deeper into my trap. Welcome back to Dad's Revenge Stories. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced betrayal from someone you truly trusted? Just drop a yes or no in the comments. I read everyone, and your perspective matters. Quick note, some details are fictionalized to strengthen the message, but the lesson is what truly matters. I signed the $340 million Millennium Tower contract at 8:47 a.m. on a Monday, 67 years old, and steady-handed the largest deal in sterling commercial real estate's history. And by 3 p.m. that afternoon, my 3 children would walk through my conference room door for the first time in 4 years. The pen moved across the signature line without hesitation. At 67, I'd learned that the steadiest hands belong to men who've already lost everything once and decided never to lose it again. The contract represented 18 months of negotiation, 12 architectural revisions, and the kind of precision that separates a $340 million project from a $340 million disaster. I set the pen down exactly parallel to the document's edge. Eleanor Marsh entered, carrying the quarterly reports, her footsteps deliberate on the polished floor of my 40th floor corner office. She'd worked as my executive assistant for 4 years, since the day I came back from the construction sites, and needed someone who understood that loyalty isn't bought, it's inherited from fathers who knew the cost of it. She was 41, efficient in the way that comes from raising 3 children alone while building a career that matters. Her father had worked construction with me during those 4 years I don't talk about much. She placed the reports on my desk without ceremony. "The Millennium contract is ready for filing, Mr. Sterling," she said. "Congratulations." "Thank you, Eleanor." She hesitated at the door, turned back. Her voice dropped half a register. "They'll arrive at 3 p.m. I didn't ask who. I'd known for 3 weeks they were coming. After she left, I sat in the silence that follows significant moments, the kind where you've just signed your name to something that will either define your legacy or destroy it. And the only variable left is whether the people you built it for will burn it down before the ink dries. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago spread out below me like a blueprint come to life. May sunshine cut hard angles across the skyline. Somewhere down there, construction crews were breaking ground on projects I'd never see completed. That used to bother me. It doesn't anymore. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, the one that locks, the one Eleanor has never asked about. The file was 3 inches thick. I'd started it 6 months ago, the day Catherine Walsh first warned me Julian was asking questions. Catherine ran financial forensics for the firm we kept on retainer, the kind of firm that doesn't advertise because their client list would violate 6 confidentiality agreements. She'd called me on a Tuesday afternoon in November and said, "Your son is asking about trust structures and asset transfers. Thought you should know." I'd thanked her and hung up. Then I'd opened this drawer and started building the file. Inside, surveillance reports from a private investigator whose name I'll never write down. Financial records showing transaction patterns that would make a prosecutor smile. Legal documents prepared by Wayne Lancaster, my attorney, who'd watched me rebuild from nothing and understood that sometimes the foundation work happens in silence. Copies of emails I wasn't supposed to see, phone records, meeting logs, a timeline stretching back 7 years with red annotations marking the moments when coincidence became pattern and pattern became conspiracy. I didn't need to review it. I'd memorized every page the way you memorize the blueprints for a building you're constructing in enemy territory, because one missed detail means the whole thing comes down on your head. What does a father owe children who took $180 million of his money and then disappeared the moment he had nothing left to give? I closed the drawer, locked it. The key went back into my pocket, warm against my thigh. 4 years of silence. Not a birthday call. Not when the company won the Riverside project. Not when I turned 65. Not once. And now they needed something. I didn't know what yet. The investigator's last report had been vague on motive, specific on movement. But I knew the shape of need when it started circling back to the person it had abandoned. I stood at the window. 11th floor rooftop across the street. Someone's rooftop garden tomato plants in neat rows. I'd been broke at 63, standing in October rain at a Southside construction site wearing boots I'd bought at a discount store because the good ones cost more than my weekly paycheck. 4 years later, I was here again, 40 floors up, $2.5 billion under management corner office, with a view that real estate agents describe as commanding, because proof you won doesn't show up in listing copy. The difference wasn't the money. It was knowing exactly what I'd do when they came back. The pen that signed the Millennium contract sat on my desk beside a glass of water I hadn't touched since 7 a.m. Both objects caught the light the same way, functional, unremarkable, positioned within easy reach. Tools. In the bottom drawer, the file waited with the same patient utility. You don't rebuild an empire by accident. You do it with precision, with planning, with the understanding that every structural element serves a purpose, and nothing gets added to the blueprint without knowing exactly how much weight it needs to bear. They thought they were coming to take. They didn't know I'd been building the cage for half a year. I checked my watch at 2:47 p.m. The second hand swept past 12 with mechanical indifference. Somewhere below in the parking garage, a security camera I'd had Vernon Henderson install last month was recording 3 vehicles as they arrived. 3 separate cars because they'd learned not to arrive together. That kind of caution suggests they'd thought this through. Good. I respect preparation even in people who are about to discover they've prepared for the wrong conversation. 13 minutes. The file in my drawer held every piece of evidence I'd need. 6 months of investigation. 7 years of betrayal documented with the kind of thoroughness that turns family tragedy into courtroom certainty. I'd even included the small things, the details that don't prove guilt, but reveal character. The kind of details that make a judge lean forward in their chair and start paying closer attention. The only question left was whether they'd bring the rope I'd been preparing for them, or whether I'd have to hand it to them myself. I straightened my tie, adjusted the Millennium contract so its corner aligned perfectly with the desk's edge. Outside my office, I heard Eleanor's phone ring, once then silence. The elevator chimed somewhere down the hall. 3 o'clock, 13 minutes away. I sat down in my chair, folded my hands on the desk, and waited for my children to tell me what they wanted badly enough to come back after 4 years of nothing. I already knew what it would cost them. They walked into the conference room at 3:02 p.m., 2 minutes late, which told me everything I needed to know about how little they thought this meeting mattered. Julian entered first, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, 42 years old, and carrying himself like a man who'd never been told no, because I'd spent his whole life making sure he never had to hear it. He walked straight to the windows, surveying Chicago like he was already imagining his name on the building. Leo followed, 36 years old, and looking at his phone like it might save him from having to acknowledge why he was really here. He sat without meeting my eyes. Victoria came last, 38, and gripping her handbag with both hands. In that grip, I saw what I needed to know. She didn't want to be here, but she was here anyway. Eleanor stood by the door, legal pad, ready face, professionally neutral. We'd rehearsed nothing. The only script was the one I carried in my head, And the first rule was simple: let them think they're winning. "Father," Julian said, turning from the window. "It's been too long. The office looks impressive. 4 years. Not once had any of them called. Not on my birthday. Not when the Riverside Project made the Tribune. Not once." "Thank you for coming," I said. "How have you been, Dad?" Victoria asked quietly. "Busy. The Millennium Tower contract closed this morning." Julian's smile tightened. "I saw that. Congratulations. That's actually part of why we wanted to talk." He pulled a leather portfolio from his briefcase, placed it on the glass table between us. "We've prepared a proposal for the company's future. You've built something remarkable, but it's time we talked about transition. About legacy." I didn't reach for it. "Leadership transition," Julian continued. "Family legacy preservation. I'm proposing a restructuring 65% equity transfer to myself with provisions for Victoria and Leo. The company stays in family hands. You retain a consulting role. Full benefits." Leo's thumb stopped scrolling. Victoria's grip tightened. "Children cast long shadows when the sun is low. And at 67, I'd learned that the longest shadows belong to the people who arrive when they need something." I pulled the portfolio toward me, slowly opened to the first page. "Proposal for ownership restructuring." Beneath that, 12 pages of legal language dressed up in words like fiduciary responsibility and succession planning. I read the first paragraph twice, let my finger trace the same line 3 times. "Is Catherine here?" I asked. Julian blinked. "I'm sorry." "Catherine. I thought she'd be at this meeting. She usually helps me with these things." "Father, there's no Catherine. We need to focus on—" "Oh." I looked up, let confusion settle on my face. I could have sworn— well, never mind. What was I looking at? Julian exchanged a glance with Victoria. Quick, calculated, the kind of look that said, "This is easier than we thought." "The ownership transfer," he said slower now. "We've structured it to protect everyone's interests. All you need to do is review it with your attorney and—" "I'll need some time," I said. I closed the portfolio, pushed it back towards center. "These things, I need to talk to my people about this." Of course." Julian's smile returned wider. "Take whatever time you need. Though I should mention there are some time-sensitive elements. Market conditions, you understand." "Yes, time-sensitive, I understand." I didn't understand. That was the performance. The real understanding was watching Julian's jaw unclench, Leo's shoulders drop, Victoria's grip loosen just enough to suggest relief. They'd expected resistance. They'd prepared for negotiation. What they'd gotten was an old man who seemed confused about who Catherine was and needed time to talk to his people. In that gap between expectation and reality, I could see their next move forming. "We'll be in touch soon," Julian said, standing. Leo stood without speaking. Victoria met my eyes for the first time, and in that look I saw something that might have been apology or guilt or nothing more than what she wanted me to see. They left the way they'd arrived, Julian first, Leo trailing Victoria last. Eleanor closed the door. I stood at the window watching until I saw 3 figures emerge below separate toward 3 different cars parked at 3 different meters. Even in their exit, they'd learned not to be seen together. "First move complete," I said to the empty room. Eleanor returned at 7:30 p.m. The city had gone dark outside, lights scattered across the skyline like evidence of other people's lives continuing without knowledge of what happened in rooms like this. She carried a thick file, 4 months of surveillance. "Julian's movements," she said, spreading photos across my desk. 3 unusual financial transactions. 7 meetings at non-corporate locations. Cash payments at 4 restaurants. I flipped through the images. Julian at a coffee shop. Julian outside a private club. Julian at an outdoor cafe leaning forward in conversation with someone whose face was turned away. This one, Eleanor said, tapping a photo from River North. He met this man 4 times over 3 months. We haven't identified him yet, but the meetings were all off-calendar cash-only locations. The photograph showed Julian's profile animated gesturing. Across from him, a man in his 60s, gray hair, expensive watch visible. His face was partially obscured, but his chin was clear. And the way he held his coffee cup, both hands wrapped around it like he was warming them even in summer. I stopped breathing. The worst betrayals aren't the ones that surprise you. They're the ones that arrive wearing a face you used to trust. I know who this is, I said quietly. Or I knew him. 20 years ago. Eleanor waited. Different conference room. Different company. I signed papers I shouldn't have signed. Trusted a partner I shouldn't have trusted. Shook hands one final time with a man I thought had disappeared forever. Who is he? The office lights dimmed on their timers. The photo remained visible in the glow from the city below the stranger's chin, the coffee cup held with both hands, the habit I'd watched 20 years ago in a room where I'd made the kind of mistake you spend decades trying to forget. His name is Raymond Cross, I said. My half-brother. And if he's involved in this, then everything I thought I knew about why my children came back is wrong. Catherine Walsh told me about Julian's bribe attempt before I'd even sat down in the leather chair across from her desk, and the fact that she'd refused $200,000 in 3 seconds told me everything I needed to know about who I'd chosen to build this trap. He came Monday night, she said. Still wearing the same suit from your meeting. Offered me $200,000 to drop you and represent what he called the family interest. I'd spent Tuesday night staring at the surveillance photo of Raymond Cross, my half-brother, the man I'd cut loose 20 years ago when his business practices started crossing lines I couldn't uncross. I'd wondered how long he'd been planning this, how many years he'd spent nurturing Julian's resentment into something he could weaponize. Now I had part of my answer. Julian had waited exactly 2 hours after I didn't sign before trying to buy my lawyer. What did you tell him? I asked. I said no before he finished the sentence. Catherine Walsh had been practicing estate and corporate law for 28 years, and in that time she'd learned that the most important word in her profession wasn't settlement or contract. It was no. And she said it faster than anyone I'd ever met. She was 54, gray hair pulled back in a knot that suggested efficiency over vanity, and her office on the 28th floor of the Wacker Drive building had a view of the river that she never looked at during business hours. Called you the next morning, she continued, which is why we're sitting here Wednesday instead of me filing bar ethics complaints on Tuesday. The morning sun cut through the window behind her, turning the glass of water on her desk into a prism. Outside, boats moved up the Chicago River, carrying tourists who had no idea that in rooms like this, families destroyed each other with fountain pens and legal language. 2 hours, I said. He waited 2 hours after leaving my office. Desperate timeline, Catherine agreed. Which brings us to this. She slid a document across her desk. 23 pages bound with a black clip. The header read, Acknowledgement of Debt and Family Obligation Agreement. This isn't what Julian asked for, I said. No. It's what we're giving him. She leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. This isn't a will. It's not an ownership transfer. It's a legal instrument that appears to acknowledge family debts and obligations, while actually documenting every illegal move he makes. Every signature they collect, every document they present, every demand they make, it all builds a prosecutable record of conspiracy, extortion, and fraud. I turned to page 3. The language was dense, deliberately so. Clauses that seemed to transfer authority actually documented coercion. Sections that appeared to acknowledge debts actually created a paper trail of illegal demands. The best traps aren't built from iron and springs. They're built from documents and signatures and the arrogance of men who think paperwork can't touch them. How much time do we have? I asked. Catherine tapped her pen against her notepad. She'd already started a timeline. I could see dates and notes in her precise handwriting. 6 weeks. Maybe 7. He's moving too fast, which is good for us. Desperate people make mistakes. They push when they should wait. They threaten when they should negotiate. And when they make those mistakes, we document them. Every phone call, every meeting, every attempt to influence witnesses or modify records. By the time we're done, you won't just have grounds to refuse his proposal, you'll have grounds to prosecute. I set the document down, carefully aligned its edge with the corner of her desk. There's something else. I pulled the surveillance photo from my jacket pocket. The image from Monday night, Julian leaning across a cafe table in River North, animated gesturing with one hand. Across from him, the man in his 60s with gray hair and the habit of holding his coffee cup with both hands. And do you recognize this man? I asked. He met with Julian 4 times before Julian came to me. Catherine studied the photo, her expression shifting from professional interest to something sharper. No, but I can tell you when this was taken. She pulled a file from her desk drawer, flipped to a page of notes. Julian met with someone Sunday night, May 5th, the night before your Monday meeting, Cash Restaurant in River North. My investigator got the receipt, but not a clear photo. Sunday night, I repeated. She nodded. Which means whoever this is, he was briefing Julian the night before Julian walked into your conference room. Probably told him exactly what to say, how to say it, when to move if you didn't sign immediately. I looked at the photo again. Raymond's chin. The coffee cup. 20 years ago, in a different office in a different city, I'd watched him hold a cup the same way while explaining why cutting corners on a structural inspection wouldn't matter. When I'd refused, when I'd gone to the authorities, when the whole partnership collapsed and took both our companies with it, he'd looked at me across a conference table and said, "You'll regret this." I'd thought he'd meant the bankruptcy, the years rebuilding, the public failure. I'd been wrong. Ghosts don't stay buried when you've given them a reason to come back. And 20 years ago, I'd given this ghost the best reason of all. I'd been right about him, and he'd lost everything because of it. "I think I know who this is," I said quietly. "Someone I had to cut loose 20 years ago. Someone who lost everything when I did." Catherine's pen stopped moving. "Should I be worried? Be careful. If he's involved, this isn't just about Julian wanting control of the company. This is about someone who spent 2 decades planning something, and my children are just the tools he's using to build it. And the 6-week timeline isn't Julian's choice," I said. "Someone's pushing him, making him move fast, make mistakes, expose himself before he's ready." Catherine made a note on her timeline. Sunday meeting with unknown man. Monday evening bribe attempt. Tuesday, I'd gotten her call. Wednesday, we were sitting here planning a legal trap that would take 6 weeks to spring. "And when do you want to meet again?" she asked. But I was still looking at the photo, at the timeline she'd written on her notepad. Julian met the stranger Sunday, offered Catherine the bribe Monday night, came to me with the proposal Monday afternoon. He wasn't setting the pace. Someone else was pushing him forward, and that someone had waited 20 years to make sure I knew exactly who was coming for me. Raymond Cross hadn't just survived the bankruptcy that destroyed us both. He'd weaponized it. I was still thinking about Catherine's 6-week timeline when the rain started Wednesday afternoon, and the sound of it on my windshield pulled me back 4 years to another October, another rain, and the first morning I stood outside a Southside construction site with nothing but a change of clothes and a blueprint I'd drawn in a different lifetime. October 2020. I was 63 years old. Every dollar I'd had was gone. I stood in rain that soaked through my wool coat, the expensive kind you wear to board meetings, not to construction sites, and stared at a half-finished building rising out of mud and scaffolding like something trying to be born. The leather shoes I wore were filling with water. I'd forgotten what construction sites felt like, forgotten that blueprint meetings and actual building sites existed in different universes, separated by mud and physics, and the kind of humility that comes from needing work. I carried two things: a gym bag with 3 changes of clothes and a plastic tube containing a rolled blueprint. The building ahead of me was skeletal. Steel frame exposed like ribs. Concrete foundation visible in sections, rebar jutting from unfinished edges. I'd poured everything I had into saving my children from their debts they'd accumulated in silence, debts they'd hidden, until the collection notices arrived at my door with numbers that made bankruptcy inevitable. And they disappeared the day the money ran out. No goodbye, no thank you. Just gone. I wasn't here to visit. I was here because I needed work, and this was the only thing I knew how to do besides sign contracts. The trailer office sat at the site's edge, mud-splattered and temporary. I knocked. Water dripped from my coat sleeve onto the metal steps. The man who opened the door was 56, wearing a hard hat, and the expression that said he'd seen 1,000 men ask for work, and learned to spot the ones who'd quit by lunch. Wayne Lancaster ran the Southside site like a man who'd spent 30 years learning that construction was 10% blueprint and 90% whether the person holding the shovel would still be there when the rain started. "Help you?" he asked. "I'm looking for work," I said. "I can start Monday." He looked at my soaked coat, my leather shoes, my 63-year-old face. "No offense, but you're not exactly young. This is hard work, 10-hour days, concrete and steel." "You sure?" I unrolled the blueprint from the plastic tube. The paper crinkled, water spotted at the edges, but intact. I spread it across the trailer's folding table. "I designed that building," I said, pointing through the window at the steel skeleton outside. "Foundation went in 3 inches off on the northwest corner. I know every beam that's supposed to go up." Wayne stepped closer, studying the blueprint. Professional drafting. Architectural stamp in the corner. Date 2008. 12 years old. His eyes moved from the drawing to the building, then to my face, then back to my soaked leather shoes. "You drew this?" he asked. "When?" 12 years ago. Different firm, different life. What does a man do when he's spent 40 years building an empire and loses it all in one decision to save the people who needed saving least? He stood there for a long time, rain drumming on the trailer roof, the blueprint between us, like evidence of a previous existence. "Monday," he finally said. 6 a.m. Bring boots. Real ones. The first week, my hands bled. Mixing concrete, carrying rebar loading trucks with materials that had weight and mass, and didn't care that I'd once managed projects from climate-controlled offices 40 floors above street level. The second week, the bleeding stopped. Calluses formed where soft skin had been. Wayne watched me that first month, the way foremen watch new hires waiting for the moment. I'd realized this was too hard, too dirty, too far beneath whatever I used to be. But I'd already learned the most important lesson of bankruptcy. There's no such thing as beneath you when you're trying to survive. By the 3rd month, he stopped watching. The building rose. Steel went vertical. Concrete poured into forms I helped build. I learned the names of tools I'd only specified in documents, come-alongs, rebar tiers, transit levels. My leather shoes disappeared, replaced by boots I bought from a discount store because the good ones cost more than my weekly paycheck. Winter came. We worked anyway. Spring, summer, another winter. The building grew floor by floor, and somewhere in the rhythm of 10-hour days and paychecks that covered rent and nothing else, I stopped thinking about the empire I'd lost and started thinking about whether the concrete would cure properly in the cold. 4 years blurred into seasons measured by projects completed. The South Side building finished. A warehouse renovation on the West Side. The apartment complex in Evanston. Wayne kept hiring me. I kept showing up. You don't rebuild from nothing by remembering who you used to be. You do it by forgetting, and then slowly, carefully discovering if there's anything left worth keeping. In the present Wednesday afternoon, May 2024, I sat in my car outside Catherine's law office watching rain streak the windshield. My phone buzzed. Wayne's name on the screen. Saw the news about the Millennium contract, he said when I answered. Congratulations. Thank you. Listen, I've been meaning to ask you something. 4 years I worked next to you on those sites. Why didn't you tell me who you were? Who you'd been? The rain intensified the same sound it made on that October morning 4 years ago when I'd stood outside his trailer with a blueprint and leather shoes and nothing else. Because I didn't know who I was then, I said. I had to find out if I was the man who built things or just the man who'd lost them. Wayne was quiet for a moment. And I'm the man who builds things. I just had to prove it to myself the hard way. He'd nodded when I'd told him that we'd had coffee later that week, talked about the old days on the sites. But sitting in my car in the rain 4 years after that first morning watching Catherine's law office disappear in my mirror, I understood something I hadn't understood then. I'd spent 4 years rebuilding so I could stand on the 40th floor again. Rebuilt not just the company, but myself, concrete and steel calluses and humility, the knowledge that I could start from nothing and make something worth having. And I'd be damned if I'd let the same children who'd taken everything once do it twice. This time I knew what I was fighting for. This time I was ready. That resolve hardened into certainty. Friday night, when I opened the drawer I'd kept locked for 4 years, not because I'd forgotten what was inside, but because I'd needed to forget long enough to survive rebuilding. And now it was time to remember exactly what my children had cost me. The penthouse was dark except for the desk lamp in my private office. Through the windows, Chicago glittered with the kind of indifference cities specialize in. The drawer opened with a sound like a safe being cracked, which seemed appropriate given what it contained. Financial records, bank statements, legal documents, the paper trail of how a man loses everything in exactly 18 months. Julian's file came first. Miami 2018. A real estate development deal that looked brilliant on paper luxury condos, on reclaimed waterfront pre-construction sales, already at 70% projected returns, that would have made him the golden boy of commercial development. Except the environmental reports had been falsified, the foundation work was happening on unstable fill, and by the time the truth came out, $85 million in debt sat on contracts Julian had personally guaranteed. The developers he'd borrowed from weren't the kind who negotiate. They were the kind who explain what happens to people who don't pay, and they do it in quiet voices in parking garages. I'd paid it in full. Liquidated every asset I could reach, buildings I'd owned for 20 years, partnerships I'd built from handshakes, investments that had been growing since before Julian was born. $85 million wired to accounts in Miami and the Cayman Islands. And in return, my son's reputation stayed intact, and he didn't disappear into the kind of trouble that ends with police reports. He never asked how I'd managed to cover a debt that size. He just took the rescue and stopped answering my calls. 6 months later, Leo's file joined the drawer. Stock margin call? $95 million. He'd been trading on leverage he didn't understand, using borrowed money to bet on market movements he couldn't predict. And when the correction came in early 2019, it came fast and final. The brokerage called me before they called him, professional courtesy for a client who'd been with them since the 80s. I liquidated what was left. The last buildings, the last partnerships. Everything I'd spent 40 years building converted to cash and wired to cover my youngest son's education, in why you don't bet money you don't have on outcomes you can't control. He thanked me once, then he stopped answering too. $180 million. Gone in 18 months, and neither son ever asked what it cost me to save them from consequences they'd earned. What do you call a father who gives everything to save his children and then watches them walk away because saving them meant seeing them fail love or the loneliest kind of punishment. I closed Julian's file, closed Leo's file, stacked them both precisely on the desk. The paper was ordinary. The ink was black. The numbers were just numbers. But they represented the exact moment when I'd learned that sacrifice doesn't buy gratitude, it buys silence. For 4 years, I thought they left, because seeing me broke would remind them of their shame. I thought they couldn't bear watching their father work construction sites, because it would force them to confront what their failures had cost. I was wrong. They left because I knew. Julian couldn't be the confident CEO, the golden boy of commercial real estate, with a father who knew he'd lost $85 million on a deal any first-year analyst would have flagged as too good to be true. Leo couldn't be the clever investor, the market genius, with a father who'd seen him cry in a brokerage office while margin calls wiped out money that had never really been his. The worst thing you can do to people isn't taking their money. It's knowing exactly how they lost it and still being alive to remember. I put the files back in the drawer, locked it. The key went into my pocket where it would stay. Thursday, May 16th. Catherine's law office, 3 o'clock. She'd called Tuesday saying she had something that required a private meeting, and the careful way she'd said private told me this wasn't about Julian's case. The reading room was smaller than her main office, wood paneling, leather chairs. The kind of space where estate lawyers deliver news about people who aren't alive to hear it anymore. Your mother's will, Catherine said, sliding a document across the table. Formally probated. She passed March of last year, 14 months ago. I'd known sent flowers attended. The service stood in the back, because my children were in the front row, and we'd mastered the art of occupying the same space without acknowledgement. The primary bequest is to you, Catherine continued. $85 million transferred from her estate with a personal letter. She wanted you to read it yourself. The letter was handwritten on paper that still smelled faintly of her perfume. Her cursive was shaky. She'd been 83 when she died, arthritis making every word an effort. Arthur, it read. I knew what they did. I knew what you sacrificed. Julian told me about Miami the night you paid his debt. He was crying, said you'd saved his life. Leo called me after the margin call, told me you'd liquidated everything. I knew. I should have said something to them, to you, to anyone who would have listened. I didn't have the courage then. This is the only courage I have left. Use it to finish what they started. I'm sorry I couldn't stand beside you when it would have mattered. Your mother. Sometimes the people who love you most are the ones too afraid to stand beside you when standing would have cost them something, and their silence becomes another debt you carry alone. I folded the letter carefully, put it back in its envelope. There's one more thing, Catherine said. She produced a second envelope from her briefcase. Cream-colored paper sealed with red wax, the way my mother used to seal letters when she had something important to say and couldn't say it out loud. On the front, in her careful handwriting, to Arthur, open only when everything is over. I picked it up, felt the weight of it. Something inside thicker than a letter. The wax seal was intact, pressed with her old signet ring. Do you want to open it now? Catherine asked. No, I said, putting it in my jacket pocket. Not yet, because I knew one thing with absolute certainty: everything wasn't over yet. The sealed envelope stayed in my desk drawer, next to the locked financial records, waiting for the moment when everything would be over. Friday morning, that moment felt closer than it had the day before. Vernon Henderson knocked on my office door at 7:43 a.m., carrying a manila folder that would tell me exactly how much trouble my eldest son thought I was in. He'd been Sterling Corporation's chief of security for 20 years. And in that time, he'd learned that the most important part of protecting someone wasn't the cameras or the locks. It was knowing when to knock instead of using the intercom. Come in, I said. He closed the door behind him, set the folder on my desk. No greeting, no small talk. That told me everything I needed to know about the contents. Julian's movements, he said. Wednesday and Thursday. You asked me to track everywhere he went that wasn't home or his office. I opened the folder. Surveillance photos time-stamped. A typed timeline. Addresses cross-referenced with business registrations. Wednesday afternoon, May 15th. Vernon continued. Julian visited the Wacker Clinic, 28th floor. Dr. Craig Blackwell, psychiatrist. 47 minutes. I studied the photo. Julian entering a medical building at 2:14 p.m. Julian leaving at 3:01 p.m. carrying a folder that hadn't been in his hands when he arrived. A psychiatrist. Not a doctor for business advice or routine health maintenance. A psychiatrist who evaluates mental competency. Corps de compte, Vernon said. He met with a lawyer, not Ms. Walsh, different firm, Monroe and Associates. They specialize in guardianship and estate litigation. The second photo showed Julian outside a different building, shaking hands with a man in his 50s, wearing a suit that cost enough to suggest he won most of his cases. I set the photos down, carefully aligned them with the desk's edge. Monroe and Associates. What's their record? 14 incompetency petitions filed in the past 3 years, Vernon said. They win 11 out of 14. The 3 they lost were cases where the respondent died before trial. So they've never actually lost a case they finished. No, sir. The pieces arranged themselves in my mind, with the clarity of a blueprint. Julian wasn't going to wait for me to sign the ownership transfer. He wasn't going to negotiate or persuade or even threaten directly. He was going to take the company through the courts by declaring me incompetent to manage my own affairs. The psychiatrist would evaluate me or claim to. Based on the 47 minutes Julian had spent telling him about my confusion, my memory lapses, my inability to recognize people at meetings. The lawyer would file the petition. A judge would review the medical evidence and appoint a guardian to protect my interests and manage my corporation. The guardian would be Julian. The best chess players don't just see the pieces on the board. They see the pieces their opponent thinks are hidden, and they move to capture those pieces first. The confusion performance worked, I said. Asking about Catherine. Taking time to think. He believes I'm declining. Vernon nodded. The lawyer he met with builds cases on medical testimony. If Dr. Blackwell says you're incompetent, Monroe will file within a week. And once filed, an emergency hearing. They'll argue you're a danger to yourself and the corporation. Ask for temporary guardianship pending full evaluation. Most judges grant it, better safe than sorry when you're talking about someone's welfare and a company worth billions. I stood, walked to the window. Chicago spread out below, indifferent and operational. Somewhere down there, Julian was probably meeting with the psychiatrist again, refining his story, making sure every detail aligned. He thought he'd found the perfect strategy. No confrontation. No negotiation. Just a medical diagnosis and legal process, clean and clinical and impossible for a mentally incompetent man to fight. What he didn't know was that I'd been waiting for exactly this kind of move. Tell me about Dr. Blackwell, I said. Vernon flipped to the next page in the folder. Craig Blackwell, 50 years old. Licensed psychiatrist for 22 years. Clean record, no disciplinary history. Practices out of the Wacker Clinic, sees about 30 patients a week. Specializes in geriatric psychiatry and competency evaluations. Family, divorced. 2 adult children, both out of state. He lives alone in Lincoln Park. Finances. Vernon's expression shifted slightly, the look of a man who'd found something interesting. That's where it gets useful. Dr. Blackwell has a problem. IRS audit. $340,000 in back taxes and penalties from a real estate partnership that collapsed in 2019. He was a limited partner in a development deal that went south. The IRS claims he didn't report passive income properly. $340,000. Not enough to destroy him professionally, but enough to make him desperate. Desperate enough to take Julian's money for a diagnosis. Desperate enough to compromise his medical license for the promise of debt relief. Desperate enough to take my money first. When's Julian's second meeting with him? I asked. Vernon checked his notes. Tuesday morning, May 21st, 10 a.m. at the clinic. 4 days. I had 4 days to buy the man Julian thought he'd already secured. Does Blackwell know about the IRS audit being public record? Probably not. Most people don't realize that tax liens are filed publicly once they reach a certain threshold. He might think it's private. I picked up my phone, dialed Catherine's direct line. She answered on the second ring. Morning. I need a complete financial profile on Dr. Craig Blackwell at the Wacker Clinic, I said. Everything Vernon has plus anything else you can find, and I need to see him before Julian sees him again. Tomorrow, if possible. What are we offering? A way out, or a way deeper in? His choice. Catherine was quiet for a moment. I'll have the profile by noon. Give me until this afternoon to arrange a meeting, somewhere private. Somewhere Julian won't know about. Desperation is the most expensive commodity in the world, and the most useful when you find it in someone your enemy needs. Catherine called back at 3 p.m. She'd arranged a meeting for Saturday morning 9 a.m. at a cafe in Lincoln Park, 3 blocks from Blackwell's apartment. Neutral territory. Public enough to seem safe, private enough for the conversation we needed to have. I'll have his complete financial profile by tonight, she said, including the IRS payment schedule and how far behind he is. Good, because once I walk into that meeting, I'll have exactly one chance to make him understand that the choice isn't between Julian's money and mine. It's between his freedom and prison. That Saturday morning, I arrived at the Lincoln Park Cafe 30 minutes early and waited to find out if the choice I was about to offer would appeal to a man's better nature or just confirm that everyone has a price. Dr. Craig Blackwell walked in at 9:07, carrying the kind of tension that belongs to people who've spent the week calculating exactly how much deeper in debt they can afford to go before everything collapses. He was 50, well-dressed, but worn eyes scanning the cafe like a man checking for witnesses. Dr. Craig Blackwell had spent 22 years building a psychiatric practice on the principle that people were more than their worst decisions. And now he was about to find out if that principle applied to himself. I stood when he approached. Dr. Blackwell, thank you for meeting me. He shook my hand, palm damp. Mr. Sterling, I'm not sure why I'm here. I know you met with my son Julian this week, I said. We sat. I'd like to talk about that conversation. He was careful with his words. He expressed concerns about his father's ability to manage complex business affairs. He asked me to conduct an evaluation, and you agreed. I told him I'd need to meet with you first, standard procedure. I studied him. Not a criminal, not corrupt, just a man who'd made one bad investment and was watching the IRS dismantle his life piece by piece. Did Julian mention money? I asked. Blackwell's jaw tightened. He suggested the evaluation would be compensated beyond my normal fee structure. How much? He didn't specify, but the implication was clear. I pulled out 2 items, set them on the table. The first was a folder. This is your complete IRS file. Every audit notice, every penalty assessment. $340,000. I know about the 2019 real estate partnership that collapsed. I know the IRS is garnishing your wages. I know you're 3 months from losing your license. His face went pale. The second item was a check. This is $120,000, not the full amount. A start. He stared at both items. What do you want from me? He asked quietly. Continue meeting with Julian. Accept his evaluation request. But record everything he says. Every word. Every instruction. Every promise. When the time comes, you'll testify to the truth that I'm completely competent to manage my own affairs. The difference between buying someone and saving them is whether you leave them with more than they started with. And I needed Craig Blackwell to walk away from that table with something Julian could never offer the chance to still respect himself in the mirror. "You're asking me to spy on your son," he said. "I'm asking you to document an attempted fraud. There's a difference. And if I refuse, then Julian will pay you to lie about my mental state. You'll file a report that destroys my company. And 6 months from now, when the IRS finishes with you, you'll have your money and no license. Because once this goes to court, and it will, every detail of how Julian bought your testimony becomes public record." He looked at the check, at the IRS file, at me. "Why only $120,000? He asked. "If you're trying to outbid him, why not pay the whole debt? Because this isn't a bid. This is a down payment on doing the right thing. The rest comes when you testify honestly about what Julian tried to make you do. I want you to make this choice because it's right, not because it's profitable." 2 minutes of silence. Outside, a woman walked a dog. A bus stopped at the corner. Chicago continued without caring that in this small cafe, a man was deciding whether his next 22 years would be built on the same principles as his first. "Aren't you afraid I'll betray you?" Blackwell finally asked. "Take Julian's money too. Play both sides. How do you know if someone's truly corrupt or just cornered? You offer them a choice that costs them nothing to do the right thing, and then you watch which path they take when no one's forcing their hand." "I've read your entire file," I said. "Not just the IRS debt. Your practice history. Patient reviews, clean disciplinary record. 22 years of helping people, good reputation, colleagues who respect you. You made one bad real estate investment. That doesn't make you corrupt. It makes you human. I'm offering you a way out that lets you stay human." He picked up the check, studied it, set it down. "What happens next?" he asked. "Julian will call you. Probably Monday or Tuesday. You'll meet with him. You'll record everything. I'll have equipment delivered today. And when this is over, you'll have your life back. Not just your debt cleared, your integrity intact. If I do this, and it comes out that I was working with you, then it won't. Not until it's too late for Julian to do anything. And when it does come out, you'll be testifying under oath about attempted bribery and fraud. You'll be the witness, not the accomplice." He nodded slowly, picked up the check again. This time he put it in his jacket pocket. "I'll need that recording equipment by this afternoon," he said. "You'll have it by noon." I stood left. 2 20s on the table for coffee. Neither of us had finished. I left the cafe before he did, which is always the right move when you've just bought someone's testimony. Let them sit with the choice they made in private. In my car, I called Catherine. "To add another piece to the trap," I said. "The doctor is ours. Julian doesn't know it yet, but the first witness he was counting on just became mine." By Monday morning, the doctor wasn't just my witness. He was my recording device. And Julian had no idea that every word he'd say from now on would be documented by the man he thought he'd bought. Diane signed the documents at her kitchen table while her coffee was still hot. And I knew about it before Julian had even filed the papers because Vernon Henderson's network had eyes on every scanner in Julian's office building, and the scan reached my phone within 23 minutes. Diane Sterling had been married to Julian for 11 years, long enough to trust him with documents she didn't read, and short enough that she hadn't yet learned what that trust would cost her. The surveillance report came with timestamps and descriptions. 8:15 a.m. Julian's house in Lincoln Park. Kitchen table, stack of legal documents, coffee cups, morning light through the window. Julian across from his wife, calm and confident. Just some internal restructuring filings. He'd told her according to the listening device Vernon had someone install in their smoke detector 2 weeks prior. Both our signatures needed for the corporate documents. Standard procedure, my lawyer said it's cleaner with both names. She'd signed on page 4, page 9, page 12. Didn't read past the first paragraph. Trusted the man she'd married. Her signature would become evidence piece 47. She had no idea she'd just signed documents transferring assets she didn't know existed to accounts Julian controlled alone. Asset transfer agreements disguised as routine corporate filings. Her name lending legitimacy to fraud. I felt something close to pity for her. Julian had weaponized his own wife's trust, turned her into an unwitting accomplice. When this went to court, and her signature would be there in black ink, proof that she'd been part of it, whether she'd understood it or not. The Sterling Corporation shareholder meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. Monday morning. I arrived at 11, 2 hours late, walking into the 40th floor conference room, like a man who'd gotten lost on the way to somewhere he'd been 1,000 times. Board members looked up from their papers. Vernon Henderson stood near the door, professional and neutral. Julian watched from the hallway outside, visible through the glass wall. My apologies for the delay," I said, setting my briefcase down with a slight fumble. Traffic was wait, is this the May 18th quarterly review? I had May 18th in my calendar. A board member, Thomas Brennan, been with the company 12 years, spoke gently. "Mr. Sterling, today is May 20th. This is the regular shareholder meeting. Are you feeling all right?" I looked at my phone, made a show of checking the date, confusion settling on my face like makeup. May 20th, of course. I must have the calendar on my phone has been acting strangely. Or I wrote it down wrong. My apologies to everyone. Acting confused. When you're thinking clearly is like playing chess with someone who thinks they're playing checkers. You let them jump your pieces while you're building checkmate 3 moves ahead. The meeting continued. I contributed when necessary, made appropriate comments about quarterly performance and projected earnings. But I could see the glances exchanged between board members, the concerned looks, the kind of worry that appears when someone's mental sharpness starts to dull at the edges. Julian stood in the hallway the entire time, arms crossed, watching through the glass. Not worried, calculating, satisfied. Vernon's report came at 2 p.m. Julian left the building at 11:47, he said in my office. Made an 11-minute call from his car in the parking garage. We traced it, Dr. Blackwell's direct line. And Eleanor's been monitoring Blackwell's calls per his cooperation agreement. He contacted her immediately after. Julian said, "I think it's time. We need to move forward with the evaluation. I'd like to schedule my father for this week." I nodded slowly. The pieces were moving exactly as designed. Eleanor appeared at my office door 20 minutes later, with a transcript of the full conversation. Blackwell had recorded it as agreed. Julian's voice was clear on the audio file, urgent and certain. "The incident today confirmed it," Julian had told the doctor. He showed up 2 hours late to a shareholder meeting. Thought it was May 18th when it's the 20th. Made excuses about his phone calendar. This isn't the first time there was confusion at our initial meeting earlier this month. He's declining, and we need documentation before it gets worse. Blackwell's response had been perfectly calibrated. "I understand your concern. I can schedule an evaluation for Wednesday morning if that works. We'll need about 2 hours for a comprehensive assessment." "Wednesday is perfect," Julian had said. "Thank you, doctor. This is difficult, but it's necessary. For his protection and the company's." I listened to the recording twice. The second time I noticed Julian's tone. Not grief, not worry. Anticipation. He was moving pieces on a board, executing a plan, and he thought every piece was where he'd put it. The hardest part of setting a trap isn't building it. It's waiting while someone you used to love walks toward it step by step, and knowing you're the one who left the door open. That evening, I sat in my car in the executive parking garage, engine off, city lights, visible through the windshield. Vernon's final message of the day glowed on my phone screen. "Julian scheduled your psychiatric evaluation for Wednesday morning, 9 a.m. Wacker Clinic. Dr. Blackwell confirmed. 3 staged incidents. First, the Catherine confusion at the initial meeting. Second, Arriving late today, wrong date, rambling, apology. The third would come naturally if I needed it, but two was probably enough. Julian had taken the bait. One purchased doctor who was actually mine. 6 weeks on Catherine's timeline, and we were right on schedule. I put the car in gear and pulled out of the garage past Julian's reserved spot, 3 spaces from mine. His car was already gone. He was probably home by now telling Diane about his father's worrying decline, explaining why difficult decisions would need to be made soon. She'd believe him. She'd signed the documents that morning without reading them. She'd sign whatever he put in front of her next. And every signature, every document, every recorded phone call would become another piece of the case I was building against the son I'd raised, to run an empire who decided it was easier to take one than to earn it. Now we wait. Wednesday's evaluation came and went exactly as planned. Dr. Blackwell recorded every misleading word Julian fed him, and I spent 2 hours answering questions designed to reveal cognitive decline I didn't have. By Saturday, I was ready to watch Julian's next move unfold. What I wasn't ready for was my 10-year-old grandson pulling me aside in his father's backyard and handing me the final piece of a puzzle that started 20 years ago with a handshake I should never have given. Connor Sterling ran across Julian's Lincoln Park lawn the moment my car pulled up, all energy and 10-year-old enthusiasm, and for a moment I forgot I was standing in enemy territory, visiting a son who was trying to declare me mentally incompetent. Connor was still young enough to think that adults kept secrets because they were planning birthday surprises, not because they were planning betrayals that had been 20 years in the making. "Grandpa, you came. I've been asking Dad all week if you could visit." I hugged him, felt the uncomplicated warmth of someone who hadn't learned to calculate affection yet. Over his shoulder, I could see Julian and Diane watching from the kitchen window. Distant, but allowing the contact. Julian had permitted this visit for a reason. Either to demonstrate normalcy before filing incompetency papers, or because Diane had insisted, or both. "Come see the treehouse spot," Connor said, pulling my hand. "I want to show you where we're going to build it." The oak tree stood at the back of the property, old and substantial. Connor led me there like he was showing me something secret, something important. I followed, aware that every window in the house offered a view of this backyard, that this conversation was probably being monitored, even if the words couldn't be heard. "Right there," Connor said, pointing at a thick branch about 12 feet up. "Dad said maybe next summer we could build a platform. Do you think that branch is strong enough?" "It looks solid," I said. "Good choice." He glanced back at the house, then pulled me down so he could whisper. Not the whisper of a child with a secret, the whisper of someone who'd learned that some things shouldn't be overheard. "Grandpa, I heard Dad talking to a man Thursday night, in his study with the door locked. I wasn't spying, I just heard voices when I went to get water." My pulse quickened, but I kept my voice calm. "What did you hear?" "They said a name, Raymond, and something about selling the whole thing before the old man figures it out." He looked worried. "That's mean, isn't it, calling you an old man?" Children are the most dangerous witnesses because they have no idea what they've seen. They just tell you the truth without knowing which truths can destroy entire conspiracies. "Tulkanor," I said carefully. "What did this Raymond look like?" "Can you remember? I only saw him for a second when he was leaving. He's really tall, taller than Dad, and he has this big gold watch, super shiny. I saw it when he shook Dad's hand at the door." The gold watch. Everything stopped. I'd given Raymond that Rolex in 1999 when we'd formed our partnership, 2 brothers trying to build something that combined his connections with my construction expertise. 25 years later, and he was still wearing it. In my son's study. Planning to take my company. He was, "Grandpa, are you okay?" I realized I'd been silent too long. "I'm fine. Thank you for telling me. But Connor, this is important. Don't mention that you told me about this. Not to your dad, not to your mom." Can you do that? He nodded, serious in the way children get when they understand something matters, even if they don't understand why. Good boy, I said. Now show me exactly where that platform would go. We spent another 10 minutes discussing tree houses, while my mind raced through calculations that had nothing to do with load-bearing branches. Thursday night, 2 days ago. Raymond had been in this house in Julian's locked study discussing timeline and strategy. Sell the whole thing before the old man figures it out. But I had figured it out. The surveillance photos had shown me Raymond's face 3 weeks ago. What Connor had just given me was confirmation that this wasn't ancient history. Raymond was actively, currently physically present in Julian's life. Meeting with him, directing him, using him. Some people wait 20 years for revenge, and the weapon they choose isn't a gun or a lawsuit. It's your own son, cultivated like a seed, planted in soil you thought was safe. 20 years ago, I discovered Raymond accepting bribes on a project we were building together. $120 million development, and he'd been taking money under the table from contractors in exchange for overlooking safety violations. When I'd found out, I'd gone to the authorities. The partnership dissolved. The project collapsed. Raymond lost his license, his reputation, his money. We'd stood in my office signing dissolution papers, and I'd watched that gold Rolex catch the afternoon light as his wrist rested on my desk. Our last handshake. I'd thought that was the end. I'd been wrong. He'd disappeared for years. I'd assumed he'd moved away, started over somewhere else, learned his lesson about cutting corners that could kill people. Instead, he'd been planning. Waiting. And 7 years ago, according to the timeline Catherine had built from surveillance, he'd met Julian at a family party. Before the Miami debt. Before everything fell apart. He'd met my son and seen an opportunity. Not revenge through courts or competition. Revenge through my own children. Connor. Diane's voice called from the house. Dinner in 20 minutes. Coming! He yelled back, then looked at me. Do you have to go, Grandpa? I should, I said. But I'll see you again soon. I hugged him and told him he was a good boy and should go show his mother the treehouse plans. He ran off toward the house, 10 years old and innocent, having no idea he'd just confirmed that Raymond Cross, the half-brother and partner I'd cut loose for bribery 20 years ago, had been in my eldest son's study 2 nights ago, wearing the same gold watch I'd given him when I still trusted him, planning to take everything I'd rebuilt while Julian nodded along like a puppet who didn't know whose hand was inside him. I walked to my car, slowly waved to Diane in the kitchen window, drove away from the house at exactly the speed limit. 2 blocks away, I pulled over and called Catherine. Raymond Cross was at Julian's house Thursday night, I said. This isn't 20 years old. It's happening now. Catherine said she'd pull every file we had on Raymond Cross and have it on my desk by Monday. I told her not to wait, send everything tonight. Because if my half-brother had been inside Julian's house 2 nights ago, I needed to understand exactly how long he'd been there. I sat alone in my office that evening, with the lights off and the city glowing 40 floors below. And I did what I'd avoided doing for 20 years. I let myself remember exactly who Raymond Cross had been before he became the man orchestrating my destruction through my own son. We'd met in 1989. I was 32, he was 35. Half-brothers who'd grown up separately, but found each other as adults, discovered we had the same drive. I had the construction expertise. He had the connections. We formed a partnership that lasted 15 years. Projects across Chicago and 3 surrounding states. Office complexes, mixed-use developments, apartment towers. We built an empire together. 2004 destroyed it. I found the bank records reviewing financials for the Riverside high-rise project, a $120 million development. Wire transfers that didn't match our ledgers. Traced them to an account Raymond thought he'd hidden. $2 million. paid by Westbrook Development, our primary competitor, in exchange for our bid numbers and construction timelines. Raymond had been feeding them our proprietary information for 6 months. I confronted him on a Tuesday afternoon. "Raymond, I have the bank records. You accepted $2 million from Westbrook to feed them our bid numbers. We're done." He'd looked at me like I was being unreasonable. "Arthur, be realistic. Everyone does this. You're being naive about how real business actually works at this level." I dissolved the partnership that day, filed with the state, contacted the ethics board, turned over evidence that cost Raymond his license and his reputation. He lost everything. I thought I was being ethical. I didn't know I was creating an enemy who'd spend the next 20 years planning exactly how to take everything I'd build after him. Raymond disappeared. I heard rumors Texas, Florida, somewhere overseas. I stopped tracking him after the first year. Assumed he'd learned to stay away from Chicago. Revenge isn't a sprint. It's a crop you plant in someone else's field and tend for years until the harvest comes in, looking like their own failure. And by then, they've forgotten you ever held the seeds. 2017. A family party I didn't attend. I'd been in Seattle closing the Cascade deal. Eleanor had organized an anniversary celebration. I'd sent my regrets. Raymond had appeared at that party. First time anyone in the family had seen him since 2004. 13 years of silence, and he'd walked into my house like he belonged there. He'd met Julian that night. Julian was 35. Already chafing under my shadow, already convinced he could run the company better. Already hungry for recognition, for authority, for proof that he was more than Arthur Sterling's eldest son. Raymond would have seen that hunger immediately, recognized it, fed it. He didn't find Julian's weakness. He created it. 7 years of carefully planted suggestions. Your father doesn't trust you. You deserve to lead. He'll never step aside unless you take it. 2018. 1 year after Raymond met Julian, the Miami real estate deal that cost my son $85 million. What if that wasn't bad luck? What if Raymond suggested the investment? What if he knew the development was over-leveraged, knew the environmental reports were falsified, knew exactly when it would collapse? What if he encouraged Julian to guarantee the full amount, personally knowing it would require my intervention? I paid that debt in full. Liquidated assets to save Julian's reputation. Thought I was being a father. What if I was just playing my part in Raymond's script? What if bankrupting me was always the goal, and Julian's Miami disaster was just the mechanism? How do you fight an enemy who's been moving pieces on your board for 7 years, while you thought the game was over 20 years ago? I walked to the window. Chicago at night, lights stretching to the horizon. Somewhere out there, Raymond was probably celebrating. Thursday night, he'd been in Julian's study, planning final moves. By now, he knew about the psychiatric evaluation, knew Julian was filing incompetency papers, knew everything was proceeding exactly as designed. What he didn't know was that I knew. Connor's whispered information about the gold watch had given me what I needed. Not just Raymond's identity. Confirmation that he was actively, physically present. Recent. Current. 7 years. Raymond had invested in cultivating my son's resentment. I'd invested 4 years rebuilding from nothing, working construction sites, earning calluses, proving I could rise from bankruptcy. We were playing the same long game on the same board, and I didn't even know he was still in the city until my grandson told me about a shiny watch. But now I knew. I turned on my desk lamp and pulled out Eleanor's surveillance files, all of them going back 4 months. If Raymond had been in Julian's life for 7 years, there would be traces I'd missed. Patterns, meetings, money transfers, email domains, phone records. Because the one thing I knew about Raymond Cross from 15 years of partnership was that he always left a trail. He was meticulous about documentation, obsessive about records, the kind of man who kept copies of everything because he never knew when he might need leverage. That trait had helped us build an empire together. Now it would help me find where he'd been hiding in plain sight all along And when I found that trail, I'd follow it straight back to every move he'd made, every person he'd planted, every piece he'd positioned on this board. And then I'd take them all. I spent 3 days hunting through surveillance files, cross-referencing names and companies looking for Raymond's trail. By Wednesday morning, Eleanor had found it. She walked into my office carrying the file I'd been searching for since Saturday night. The complete investigation into Serena Archer, the woman my youngest son thought he'd fallen in love with, and the woman Raymond Cross had hired 4 months before they ever met. Serena Archer. Eleanor said, setting the folder on my desk. 32 years old. Cayman Islands business consulting registration 22 months ago, March 2022. She met Leo in November 2022. 4 months between company formation and first contact. 4 months. She wasn't a relationship that turned into betrayal. She was hired to seduce him before they ever spoke. Raymond had been planning this for nearly 2 years. I opened the folder. Corporate registration documents. Bank account activity. Email server analysis. The kind of forensic investigation that costs money and takes time. And I'd paid for both because I'd needed to know exactly how deep this went. The email server IP matches a Chicago subsidiary registered under one of Raymond's shell companies. Eleanor continued. Cross Corporate Holdings, LLC, formed in 2021. Serena's employment contract is dated February 2022. Her assignment established relationship with Leo Sterling gain access to internal corporate information. What did he give her? 14 internal documents. System security maps, VIP client lists, 3 active project files including the Riverside expansion and the Harbor District development. Market value to a competitor looking to underbid or sabotage us approximately $40 million. $40 million in leaked information. And Leo probably thought he was sharing business insights with someone who cared about his career. Someone who listened. Someone who made him feel valued in ways his father apparently didn't. Raymond had weaponized my son's loneliness. Where is she now? I asked. Unknown. Last confirmed sighting was May 15th. She cleared out her apartment the following weekend. Phone disconnected. Email bounced. She completed her assignment and disappeared. The cruelest weapon isn't the one aimed at you, it's the one you hand to someone you love and watch them turn on each other while thinking they're being clever. I closed the folder. Thank you, Eleanor. This is exactly what I needed. She left, and I sat with the knowledge that my youngest son had been so thoroughly manipulated that he'd handed corporate secrets to a woman who'd been hired specifically to extract them, and he still probably thought she genuinely cared about him. Thursday evening, Vernon Henderson knocked on my door at 8 o'clock, carrying audio recording equipment. Thursday evening, he said without preamble. River North Boutique Hotel Suite. Leo met Raymond Cross, 4th documented meeting. No hotel cameras in that wing, cash-only arrangement. I had audio equipment in the adjacent room. He set up the playback device on my desk. 47 minutes of conversation. You need to hear this. I pressed play. Static, then voices. Leo's voice younger and more uncertain than I remembered. Raymond's voice confident and paternal in the way that makes young men think they're being mentored instead of manipulated. The structure is clean, Raymond said. $800 million for 40% of the corporation shares, distributed through 3 offshore entities, Cayman, Singapore, Luxembourg. Clean transfers, no tax implications, completely legal. To $800 million. Leo repeated, and I could hear the hunger in his voice. For 40%. More than fair market value, Raymond said. But there's one condition. You sign before the board session. Before anyone knows. Before your father, before Julian, before any of them have a chance to interfere. They'd try to stop it. Of course they would. Your father because he can't let go. Julian because he's planning his own move. But this is your chance, Leo. Financial independence. Proof that you can execute a major transaction without asking permission. There was a pause. Ice clinking in a glass. Movement. Julian doesn't know about this meeting, does he? Raymond asked. About our arrangement. No, Leo said. This is between us. He's focused on the incompetency filing. He thinks he's getting control through the courts. He has no idea I'm negotiating independently. Good. Keep it that way. What Julian's planning, that's messy. Legal battles, psychiatric evaluations, public scrutiny. This is clean, professional. A business transaction between equals. When do you need my signature? Next week. I'll have the documents ready by Monday. We'll meet again, same location. You bring your signature, I bring the first wire confirmation. 24 hours later, you're the wealthiest 36-year-old in Chicago. I stopped the recording. Julian was building an incompetency case to seize the company through the court's psychiatric testimony, guardianship filings, legal authority, to take control and protect my interests. Leo was selling 40% of the company to Raymond for $800 million, offshore entities, secret transactions, independence from his father and his brother. Neither of my sons knew about the other's scheme. They were moving against me simultaneously, and in doing so, they were destroying each other. Julian's incompetency case would give him control. Leo's sale would transfer 40% ownership to Raymond. Both plans couldn't succeed, but both sons thought they were the only one playing. Raymond wasn't just destroying my family. He was making my sons destroy each other, while each one thought he was winning. I said, how many more meetings are scheduled between Leo and Raymond? One more. Monday afternoon. Same location. Leo is supposed to bring signed documents, and you can record it. Already arranged. Same room, same equipment. Then do it, I said. I want every word. He left, and I sat in the dark office with the city lights 40 floors below. My youngest son had just agreed to sell 40% of my company to my oldest enemy for $800 million, and he had no idea the woman who'd convinced him it was a good idea had been hired to seduce him 2 years ago. He didn't know I knew, and he didn't know that the man offering him freedom was the same man using him as a puppet to destroy his brother, his father, and eventually himself. Raymond had planted Serena to extract information, cultivated Julian for 7 years to build resentment, offered Leo an escape that was really a trap. 3 children, 3 different schemes, 1 architect. And now I had recordings, surveillance, financial evidence of all of it. The question was no longer whether I could stop them. The question was when. By Monday morning, I had recordings of both my sons committing crimes they didn't know I'd documented. What I didn't have was time to enjoy the irony because Julian had just launched his next attack. The article appeared on the Chicago Financial Tribune's website at 6:47 a.m. with a headline designed to do maximum damage without saying anything actionable, ghost or master questions about executive competence. And by the time I walked into my office at 8:03, board members had already called, asking if I'd seen it. I read it on my phone standing at the window. Every word carefully chosen. No direct accusations, just questions. Sources within Sterling Corporation have raised questions about CEO Arthur Sterling's recent behavior, including unexplained schedule confusion, missed meetings, and what one insider described as concerning lapses in executive function. While Mr. Sterling, 67, continues to lead the $2.5 billion commercial real estate firm, he founded colleagues report incidents suggesting possible cognitive decline. He showed up 2 hours late to a shareholder meeting. One source said, speaking on condition of anonymity. He thought it was a different day entirely. That's not normal. The kind of article designed to plant doubt without giving me anything to sue over. Anonymous sources, vague concerns, questions, not accusations. Eleanor entered at 8:15. 3 board members called. The Tribune piece is everywhere. Financial websites are picking it up. Good, I said. She stopped. Good. Julian's making moves in public. That means he's getting desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. I called Catherine. She answered on the first ring. I saw the article. I know you did, I said, and I'm guessing you saw it before this morning. Friday, she confirmed. Julian met with Everett Griffin at the Tribune offices Thursday afternoon. I've been building a file on Griffin since then. 3 days. Catherine had known about the smear article 3 days before publication and hadn't bothered to warn me because she'd been too busy preparing a countermove. What did you find? I asked. Plagiarism. 2019. Griffin copied 3 paragraphs from a small business publication for a real estate piece he was writing. Word-for-word theft from an article about mixed-use development financing. The Tribune almost fired him. He kept his job but lost his senior position, spent the next 5 years writing fluff pieces and trying to rebuild credibility. Reputation is like a bridge rebuilt plank by plank. After a fire, one more match, and the whole thing goes down, and the person holding the match knows exactly how much you've invested in those planks. So he's vulnerable, I said. Extremely. One more scandal ends him permanently. He knows it. Julian knows it. And now we know it. What are you proposing? I propose we meet him directly. Give him 2 files. She paused, letting me anticipate. Then 1, his plagiarism history, which I can leak to every editor in Chicago. His career dies within 24 hours. And 2, your complete conspiracy evidence. Raymond Cross, the 20-year revenge plot, Julian's incompetency scheme, Leo's $800 million betrayal, Serena, the planted spy, everything. The biggest investigative story in Chicago this year. I understood immediately. You want to give him the story. I want to give him a choice, Catherine said. Write Julian's propaganda and destroy his career permanently when I expose the plagiarism. Or write the truth, a legitimate investigative expose that could win awards and resurrect his reputation as a real journalist. He could take both. Use my evidence and still write the smear. He could. But real journalists don't work that way. And Everett Griffin spent 5 years trying to prove he's still a real journalist after making one terrible mistake. This is his chance to prove it. When do we meet him? At Wednesday morning. I'll arrange it. Does he know what it's about? He knows I have information he needs to see before he writes anything else about you. He'll come. We hung up. I turned back to the window, watched Chicago move through its Monday morning routines. Somewhere in the Tribune building downtown, Everett Griffin was probably reading responses to his article measuring engagement, feeling the satisfaction of a story landing exactly as intended. He had no idea that in 48 hours, I'd be sitting across from him with evidence that would force him to choose between the journalist he used to be and the propagandist Julian had paid him to become. The difference between propaganda and journalism is whether you're willing to lose everything to tell the truth, and most people never find out which one they are until someone makes them choose. Eleanor returned at 9 with coffee and a printout of the online article comments. You should see these. People are defending you. Some are questioning the anonymous sources. I glanced at the printout. A mix of reactions. Some concerned, some skeptical, some defending my track record. The article had landed, but it hadn't destroyed me. Julian would have wanted unanimous condemnation. What he'd gotten was conversation. The board meeting is Thursday, Eleanor said. They'll want to discuss this. Let them discuss it. By Thursday, we'll have changed the narrative. She left, and I opened my email. 3 messages from board members asking for clarification. 1 from a business reporter at a different outlet asking for comment. 1 from Julian sent at 6:52 a.m., 5 minutes after the article went live, with just a subject line, "We should talk." I deleted it without reading the body. Catherine called back at 10 a.m. Wednesday, 9 a.m. His office at the Tribune, South Loop Building. I told him to clear his morning. What did you tell him we're bringing? The truth, and consequences. Both files, the plagiarism evidence and the complete conspiracy investigation. He can choose which story he wants his name on. I looked at the article still open on my computer screen. Ghost or Master questions about executive competence. Julian's anonymous quotes dressed up as journalism. A weapon designed to undermine me before the incompetency hearing. What Julian didn't know was that he'd just handed me a journalist who was about to find out whether the career he'd rebuilt was worth more than the money someone was paying him to destroy it. Wednesday at 1 a.m. I said I'll be there. Catherine said she'd arranged the meeting somewhere Julian wouldn't know about. I told her to bring both files, the plagiarism evidence and the conspiracy investigation, because Julian had hired a reporter to write a story about me, and I was about to give that reporter the biggest story of his career, one that would either make him or prove he'd sold his integrity for a paycheck and a byline that would destroy him anyway. Wednesday morning arrived with the weight of a decision that would determine whether Julian's propaganda machine continued or whether the truth would finally have a voice. Everett Griffin's office at the Chicago Financial Tribune was smaller than I'd expected, and more cluttered than any journalist's workspace should be, which told me everything I needed to know about a man who'd spent 5 years trying to prove he deserved to keep doing the work that had almost destroyed him once already. I walked in unannounced at 9:30. He stood immediately knocking his coffee cup with his elbow. It didn't spill, but the near miss made him look even more nervous. Mr. Sterling," he said. "I wasn't expecting, if this is about Monday's article, I can explain the editorial process." "Sit down, Mr. Griffin," I said. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to offer you a choice." He sat slowly, uncertain what that meant. I took the chair across from his desk without waiting for an invitation. The office was small, cluttered with old newspapers and coffee-stained notepads. On the wall behind him, journalism awards from 2015, 2016, 2017. Nothing after 2019. He'd kept them there to remind himself of who he used to be before he made one mistake that almost ended everything. "I appreciate you meeting with me," he started. "I didn't give you a choice about that either," I said. "Catherine Walsh arranged this. You're here because you're smart enough to know that when someone asks for 30 minutes of your time after you've written a hit piece about them, you should probably show up." He nodded, hands folded on his desk. I pulled 2 folders from my briefcase, set them on his desk side by side. "I have 2 things for you," I said. "First, your plagiarism history from 2019. 3 paragraphs word for word from the Milwaukee Business Journal. Article about mixed-use development financing. You copied them into your real estate piece about the Lakeshore project." His face went pale. "My attorney has the side-by-side comparison. Original source documentation. Everything she'd need to send to every editor in Chicago by noon today. Your career, what's left of it after 5 years of rebuilding, ends permanently." I tapped the second folder. "Second, the biggest investigative story you'll ever write. 20-year conspiracy, industrial espionage, family betrayal, $800 million in fraud. A half-brother using 3 children to destroy the man who exposed his corruption 2 decades ago. Everything documented, everything provable. Names, dates, recordings, financial transfers. Integrity isn't something you lose in one moment. It's something you trade away in small pieces until someone puts all those pieces on a table and asks if you remember what they used to add up to." He stared at both folders. "The choice is simple," I said. "Keep writing what Julian Sterling pays you to write: anonymous sources, vague implications, carefully worded propaganda, and I destroy what's left of your career with the plagiarism file. Or write the truth. Real investigative journalism. The kind of work that wins awards. The kind that reminds Chicago why they gave you those awards on your wall before you made one mistake in 2019 and spent 5 years trying to prove you deserved a second chance. Before I reveal which choice Everett made, are you still with me? Comment A if you think he'll choose truth, Or B, if you think he'll take Julian's money, and add one short reason in 5 to 10 words. Quick note. The next part includes fictionalized details added to deepen the emotional impact. He didn't speak for 2 full minutes. Just sat there looking at both folders like they were evidence in a trial where he was simultaneously the defendant and the jury. His hands shook slightly when he finally reached for the conspiracy file. Opened it. Read the first page, Raymond Cross, 2004 bribery conviction, 15-year partnership, dissolved 20 years of planning revenge through manipulation of 3 children. He set it down. Picked up the plagiarism evidence. Read the side-by-side comparison of his 2019 article and the Milwaukee Journal piece he'd copied from. 3 paragraphs. Word for word. The mistake that had almost ended him. "Why would you trust me?" he asked quietly. "What stops me from taking Julian's money and yours, selling this story to whoever pays most? You're handing me leverage against both of you." "I've read everything you wrote before 2019, I said. "Real investigative work. The corruption series about the housing authority. The development fraud expose that got 2 aldermen indicted. You're a real journalist, Mr. Griffin. You just forgot that for a while when you thought survival mattered more than truth. I'm here to remind you which one you are. Every journalist has a moment when they decide whether the story owns them or they own the story. And most people never get a second chance to make that choice after they've already chosen wrong once." He looked at the awards on his wall. 2015, 2016, 2017. The years when he'd been someone who mattered in Chicago journalism, before the plagiarism, before the 5-year crawl back to barely keeping his job. "This story," he said, hand still on the conspiracy file. "If even half of this is true, this is the biggest story of your career," I said. "I know. And it's all true. Every word. I have recordings, financial documents, surveillance footage, witness testimony. You'll have everything you need to write something that wins awards or destroys careers. Possibly both. When do you need an answer?" "You're holding the answer," I said. "The folder in your hand right now, that's your answer. If you're still holding it in 30 seconds, I'll know you've chosen to be a journalist again, instead of whatever Julian Sterling paid you to become." He nodded, once his hand shaking slightly as he held the conspiracy file, and in that tremor I saw everything I needed to see. Not fear, not greed, but the weight of understanding that he was holding the kind of story that journalists spend entire careers hoping to find, and that most never do. He was a real journalist after all. He just needed someone to remind him. "I'll need 3 weeks, he said, "to do this right, to verify everything, to write it the way it deserves to be written." "You have 2, I said. "Julian's incompetency hearing is scheduled for late June. I need this published before then." 2 weeks, he agreed. I stood, left the plagiarism folder on his desk. "Keep that," I said. "Frame it if you want. Reminder of what you're not anymore." Friday, June 7th, 3 in the afternoon. Victoria walked into Julian's home office carrying a manila envelope that would detonate everything Leo had built over the past 6 months. "I know this because the woman who handed her those documents works for me. Has worked for me actually for 4 years, but we will get to that." Julian looked up from his laptop, clearly surprised by the unscheduled visit. "Victoria, I wasn't expecting you." "I need 5 minutes, she said, closing the door behind her. "What I'm about to show you cannot leave this room." She placed the envelope on his desk. Julian opened it, pulling out 3 pages of what appeared to be contract excerpts. His eyes scanned the first page, then stopped. He read it again. "What am I looking at?" he asked quietly. "Your brother's endgame," Victoria said. "While you've been building a case for incompetency, Leo has been negotiating the sale of Sterling Dynamics, $800 million to Raymond Cross, 40% of company shares transferred through offshore entities. The deal closes in 8 weeks. The color drained from Julian's face. I have seen many expressions cross my nephew's features over the years. Anger, determination, frustration. But this was something different. This was the look of a man realizing he had been playing checkers while his opponent played chess. "This can't be real," Julian said, though his voice suggested he knew it was. "It's real," Victoria confirmed. "I verified the entities, the corporate structures, the timeline. Leo has been working on this since February, maybe earlier. He's not trying to keep control of Sterling Dynamics. He's trying to cash out before you can remove him." Julian set the papers down carefully as if they might explode. "Where did you get this? Does it matter? It matters if I'm going to use it." Victoria paused. "Someone in Leo's household. Someone with access to his home office. That's all you need to know." That was the first lie. The documents came from Leo's home office, yes, but the source was more complicated than Victoria understood. Julian read through the pages again, his legal mind processing implications. If this is accurate, the board would never approve it. The sale would require majority shareholder consent. Unless he's already secured proxy votes from smaller shareholders, Victoria said. Which he has. I've seen the agreements. He needs 1 more percentage point to hit the threshold. My father would never allow this. Your father hasn't been making decisions for months, Julian. You know that. The truth of that statement hung between them. Julian stood walking to the window overlooking his perfectly maintained garden. The same garden where 18 months earlier he had hosted Thanksgiving dinner. Where Leo had smiled and made toasts and played the role of devoted brother. The same garden where Leo had already decided Julian was the obstacle to be removed. Memory is a peculiar weapon. It transforms every past kindness into evidence of deception. Every smile becomes a mask. Julian was experiencing that transformation in real time. "Why are you bringing this to me?" he asked, still facing the window. "Because I need to know which side wins," Victoria said bluntly. "Leo's plan affects my position, my team, everything I've built in that company. If he's selling to Cross, I need to know now. I need to protect myself. By helping me. By giving you information you can use. What you do with it is your decision." Julian turned back to face her. "If I use this against Leo, it will destroy him. You understand that?" "He made his choice," Victoria said. "I'm making mine." She stood to leave, believing this meeting had been her decision. Believing she had taken control of her own fate by choosing a side in the war between brothers. She had no idea the choice had been made for her. "Victoria," Julian said as she reached the door. "Thank you. I know what this cost you." She nodded and left. What it actually cost her was something neither of them could calculate. Because Victoria Douglas had just committed herself to Julian's war effort based on documents that came to her through a specific channel. A channel that began in Leo's home office, passed through certain hands, and arrived in her possession with perfect timing. The hands belonged to a woman named Hazel Chen, Leo's housekeeper, 61 years old, employed by the Sterling family for 6 years. Quiet, efficient, largely invisible to the family members who passed through Leo's home. And for the past 4 years, my most valuable asset. Hazel did not simply work for me. She observed, documented, and reported with the precision of a trained intelligence operative. Because that is exactly what she had been before she became a housekeeper. 15 years with the Defense Intelligence Agency, specializing in asset recruitment and information gathering. She retired from government service and found the work boring. So when my attorney approached her with an opportunity to do something more interesting, she accepted. For 4 years, Hazel has moved through Leo's home like furniture, present but unnoticed. She has heard every phone call he thought was private, read every document he left on his desk, observed every meeting he conducted in his home office. She provided Victoria with the sale documents. She also provided me with the same documents 3 days earlier. Victoria believed she had gained an advantage by bringing information to Julian. She did not realize she was simply playing the role I had written for her. Julian believed he had received a gift from an ally making a strategic choice. Neither of them understood that every piece of information in this war was flowing through a single point of control. Me. And Hazel, who for 4 years has been the invisible witness to everything Leo Sterling has built, planned, and destroyed, continues her work. Still quiet, still efficient, still completely unnoticed. Furniture does not betray confidences. It simply exists, observing everything, saying nothing, until the right moment arrives. Hazel Chen continued her invisible work in Leo's home. But even the best intelligence operative cannot report what happens outside her observation radius. I did not know about Serena Archer's disappearance until 3 days later, Monday, June 10th, 8:47 in the morning. Leo Sterling sat in a coffee shop 3 blocks from his apartment, checking his phone every 30 seconds. Serena was 17 minutes late. She was never late. He called her number, disconnected. Her office extension. "I'm sorry, Ms. Archer is no longer with this department." Leo drove to Sterling Dynamics headquarters. Her 4th-floor desk had been cleared. No computer, no files, nothing. The IT manager pulled up her access logs. His expression changed. "Mr. Sterling, Miss Archer accessed 14 internal files Friday night at 11:47, remote login. She copied them to an external drive with a UUID we can't trace." "What files?" "Merger drafts, acquisition timelines, Sterling family trust amendments, legal preparation notes." He paused. "Those aren't even in her department clearance level." Leo returned to his apartment and checked his email. In his spam folder sent Saturday at 3 a.m. "I'm sorry, Leo. I wish things were different." No signature, no explanation. Just those 10 words. He called Raymond Cross's private line. The line Raymond had answered without fail for 6 months. It rang and rang. Voicemail. "Dad, she's gone. The files. I need to know if you call me back. Please." Raymond did not call back. I learned about this Thursday when a loyal contact sent me the summary. By then, the real damage had already been done, not by Serena's theft, but by what happened Wednesday night while Leo nursed his broken heart. You want to know the difference between being betrayed and being destroyed. Betrayal is what Leo felt Monday morning when he realized Serena had used him. Destroyed is what I was about to do to all 3 of my children with the evidence they were handing me. Sometimes the victim has sharper teeth than the predator expects. Wednesday, June 12th, 11:38 at night. The 12th floor archive room at Sterling Corporation headquarters holds physical backups of legal files from before 2020. Most employees have forgotten it exists. Julian and Victoria had not. They arrived separately and met outside the door. Victoria held a keycard, a perfect clone of Leo's lifted by courier 2 weeks earlier, duplicated and returned before he noticed. "You're sure this works?" Julian asked. His voice had the tight quality of someone trying not to panic. "The building tech I paid $3,200 disabled the motion sensors," Victoria said. She swiped the card. The door unlocked. Inside, Victoria moved toward filing cabinets along the west wall. Julian followed, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. "What exactly are we doing?" he whispered. "Covering our tracks," Victoria said. She pulled 6 files from the 2019 and 2020 succession planning period. "If Leo's espionage gets discovered, these will show you were never involved." She spread documents on a table and produced a pen matching the original ink. She began removing references to Leo's name from consultation logs, adding Julian's signature to 4 advisory memos he had never signed. Julian tried to forge a signature. His hand shook. The ink bled. "Not like that," Victoria hissed, taking the document. "You're making it worse. Give it here." "We shouldn't be here," Julian said. "If Dad finds out..." "Dad won't find out. unless you keep shaking like a damn leaf. She worked methodically. Julian watched, thinking she would throw him to prosecutors without hesitation. Victoria worked, thinking Julian would crack under pressure the moment anyone questioned him. Neither trusted the other, but both trusted they needed this insurance. 47 minutes? From 11:38 Wednesday night to 12:25 Thursday morning. 47 minutes captured in perfect high-definition video. Vernon Henderson had installed a backup camera system 3 months earlier. Hidden lens in the smoke detector feeding to an off-site server separate from the building's main security network. Henderson sat in his ground-floor office watching the live feed. He recorded every second, every whispered exchange, every forged signature, every nervous glance Julian cast toward the door. Thursday morning, 2:04 a.m., Henderson sent an encrypted file to my secure email. Subject: enough. Message: 47 minutes. Archive room, your children. Everything you need to know about what you're fighting. I opened the attachment and watched, then watched again and again. By the fourth viewing, sunrise was breaking over the city, and I knew exactly what I was going to do. People ask if I felt guilty watching my children incriminate themselves on camera. I felt something sharper than guilt: clarity. They had stopped being my children the moment they chose Raymond over blood. What I felt at 2 in the morning was not guilt. It was relief that I finally had proof. 8 weeks of evidence gathering. Hazel's meticulous documentation of Leo's activities. The paper trail of his conversations with Raymond. Julian and Victoria's 47-minute performance captured with timestamps and whispered admissions. I had been playing defense for 2 months. That ended at 2:04 a.m. Thursday, June 13th. 6:23 in the morning. 3 folders on my desk. Hazel's testimony. Leo's paper trail. Julian and Victoria's camera evidence. 11 days until the trial on July 23rd. 4 days until the confrontation I had been planning since Henderson first warned me this war was coming. I opened my day planner to Friday, July 19th. I wrote one word: museum. Friday, July 19th. The word I had written in my planner 4 days earlier. Museum. They arrived at my penthouse at 7:18 in the evening, expecting papers to sign before Tuesday's trial. Julian came first, then Victoria, then Leo, each separately, each wearing the careful expression of people preparing for an unpleasant but necessary formality. I greeted them at the door with the tone I had practiced for a week. Neutral, almost warm. "Thank you for coming," I said. "Before we talk about Tuesday, I thought you should see what I've been doing since April 2020. I led them downstairs. They had been to my penthouse dozens of times over the past 4 years. Family dinners that felt like depositions. Awkward holiday visits where we pretended everything was fine. But they had never been to the basement. I had always kept that door locked. I unlocked it now. The room I had built over the past 6 months was small. Concrete floor. Metal shelving along 3 walls. A work table in the center, and arranged on those shelves labeled with dates written in black marker was every artifact of my 4 years in hell. Worn work boots. Steel-toed scuffed beyond recognition, the left sole split from heel to toe. Utility bills showing a balance of $127. The month I had eaten ramen for breakfast and skipped lunch entirely. Construction site photographs. Me in a hard hat and reflective vest holding a level against a concrete wall. Me operating a jackhammer. Me carrying lumber in the rain. A 4-year schedule grid covering the entire back wall. 18 construction sites. Each job labeled with start date, end date, hourly wage. April 22nd, 2020 to present day. A map of survival. Victoria spoke first. Her voice strained. "Dad, what is this?" "My resume," I said. 4 years, 18 construction sites, 2 pairs of boots. Leo stared at the photographs. Julian looked at the utility bills like they were written in a language he did not speak. None of them had asked in 4 years how I was paying rent, how I was eating, what I did with my days after they stripped me of the company I had built from nothing. Now they knew. I kept everything, I said quietly. Every pay stub, every safety certification, every shift log. I thought you should see it before a judge does. The door behind us opened. Wayne Lancaster stepped into the room. My children had never met him in person, though his name had appeared on every legal filing for 4 years. He was 63, gray-haired, with the kind of face that had seen too many courtrooms to be surprised by human cruelty. Wayne, I said, these are my children. Julian, Victoria, Leo, meet the man who kept me standing when you tried to bury me. Wayne nodded. We've corresponded. Nice to meet you in person. The shift in the room was immediate. This was not reconciliation. This was documentation. Wayne's presence transformed the museum from a father's plea into evidence. This is the life I built while you were planning Tuesday. I continued. Thought you should see it before it becomes Exhibit A. You want to know why I built this room? Because memory fades. Evidence doesn't. People forget the specifics of suffering. They forget what it costs to rebuild from zero at 65 years old. But photographs don't forget. Pay stubs don't forget. These boots worn through after 8 months of foundation work remember every step. I walked them through the timeline. April 22nd, 2020, the board vote that ended my career. May 2020, first construction job, $12 an hour. July 2020, second job, cement work, $14 an hour. On and on through summer heat and winter cold, through jobs that broke my back and others that simply broke my spirit. Julian kept his eyes on the floor. Victoria's jaw was tight. Leo looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Wayne stood by the door, saying nothing, watching everything. I'm not showing you this for sympathy, I said. I'm showing you this because Tuesday, when you walk into that courtroom and argue I'm incompetent to manage my own affairs, the judge will see these same photographs, the same timeline, the same evidence that I've been competent enough to survive 4 years of manual labor you condemned me to. Victoria found her voice. We didn't know. You didn't ask, I interrupted. There's a difference. Julian's eyes moved to a framed photograph on the center shelf. Arthur Sterling standing with a construction crew covered in dust holding a water bottle. In the background, barely visible, a woman holding a lunchbox. His face changed. That's... His voice cracked. That's the housekeeper. I watched him process it. The woman in the photograph. The woman he had seen dozens of times over 4 years serving coffee when he visited, clearing dishes, moving through my penthouse like furniture. The woman standing beside Wayne Lancaster right now. Hazel Thornton stepped forward slightly. 61 years old, gray-haired, wearing the same neutral expression she had maintained through 4 years of my children's visits. Through 4 years of listening to their conversations, their strategy sessions, their careful planning of my destruction. Hazel Thornton, I said. Hired June 2020. She's been here every week you visited, heard every word. Julian's face was drained of color. Every conversation he had thought was private. Every phone call with Raymond was conducted in my living room while I was out. Every strategy discussion with Victoria about the incompetency case whispered in my kitchen while Hazel refilled their coffee. All of it was witnessed. All of it is documented. Hazel met Julian's eyes. Quiet. Steady. She did not look away. Every word, Mr. Sterling, she said. The moment Julian's face changed, that was when I knew he understood what the witness really meant. Not theory, not an abstract legal concept, but a human being who had stood 3 feet away while he planned to destroy me, who had heard everything, who could repeat it all under oath. Leo looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Julian. Julian looked at Hazel, and she held his gaze without flinching. For the first time in 4 years, he was the one who was seen through. I let the silence hold for 10 seconds. Then I spoke. Now we can talk about Tuesday. I led them upstairs from the basement museum to the conference room I had prepared on the main floor. Wayne had set up the projector while we were downstairs. Vernon Henderson stood beside a table stacked with 3 evidence folders. I clicked the remote. The first slide filled the wall a timeline starting in 2004, 20 years before any of them thought this war began. Raymond first approached Julian in 2004, I said. Julian was 12 years old. This isn't opportunism, this is grooming. The slide showed documented meetings, every 18 months. Coffee shops, restaurants, park benches, each meeting was photographed, dated, and logged. Julian at 14, Julian at 16, Julian at 21 sitting across from Raymond Cross in a steakhouse laughing at something Raymond had said. Julian's jaw tightened. Those meetings were documented, I interrupted. Catherine Walsh traced every dollar. You want to explain $340,000 in consulting fees paid to your offshore account between 2017 and 2024. The woman standing beside Vernon stepped forward. Catherine Walsh, 57, silver-haired, wearing reading glasses on a chain around her neck. Financial forensics specialist. Wayne had retained her 8 months ago to trace Raymond's money flows through the corporate structures he had built to hide his fingerprints. The payments began in January 2017. Catherine said, her voice carrying the flat precision of someone who dealt in provable facts. Mr. Julian Sterling was 25. The account was established in Grand Cayman 3 weeks before the first deposit. 11 transfers over 7 years. The last payment arrived in April 2024. She clicked to the next slide. Bank statements, transfer receipts, shell company names. Every thread of Raymond's financial architecture exposed under the light Catherine had spent months shining into dark corners. The consulting services listed in the contract were never defined, Catherine continued. No deliverables, no timeline, just payments regular as clockwork for 7 years. Julian said nothing. Victoria sat perfectly still, her face revealing nothing. Leo looked lost. I moved to the next slide. 2017. Raymond formally recruits Julian, not as a consultant, as a long-term asset. The payments weren't compensation, they were investment. He'd been building this relationship for 13 years by then. 13 years of patience before he made his move. Photographs filled the screen. Raymond and Julian at a restaurant in 2017 leaning close over drinks. The same pair at a coffee shop in 2019, Julian taking notes on a legal pad. A park bench in 2022, Julian's body language suggesting he was listening to instruction. Vernon took those, I said. I didn't know what they meant until recently. I thought Raymond was just staying close to family. I didn't realize he was building an army. Vernon stood silent by the evidence table, his expression neutral. 31 years of corporate security work had taught him when to speak and when to simply exist, as the witness who remembered everything. I clicked to the next section. Leo. Let's talk about Serena Archer. Leo's face went pale. Catherine took over. Serena Archer was employed by Meridian Analytics, a subsidiary 60% owned by a shell company controlled by Raymond Cross. Her salary $127,000 for an analyst role that required no previous finance experience. Internal emails recovered from the subsidiary's server show clear instructions to establish a relationship with the youngest Sterling timeline unspecified. The slide showed Serena's mission timeline. Meet Leo January 2024. Gain trust February through April. Extract documents May through June. Exit June 10th. Each phase was documented with receipts, surveillance photos, access logs from Sterling Dynamics servers showing exactly when she had copied those 14 files. I don't... Leo's voice shook. I don't know who he is, Raymond, I mean. I looked at my youngest son. I am 28 years old, used like a tool and discarded the moment his usefulness expired. I know, I said quietly. That's why I didn't tell you. What does that mean? Leo asked. Why didn't you tell me? How do you tell your son you've been watching him betray you for 8 weeks and did nothing to stop it? How do you explain that love lost to strategy, that warning him would have saved one child but condemned the case? You tell the truth. I suspected your involvement in April, I said. Watched your meetings with Raymond, tracked your access patterns at Sterling Dynamics, documented every file you opened, every conversation you thought was private. I let you continue because proof required action, not suspicion. Leo stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Eleanor Marsh spoke for the first time since entering the room. My ex-wife had been sitting in the corner, silent through the museum tour and the timeline presentation. Now her voice cut through the tension. You knew in April, she asked. You watched him for 2 months. I chose evidence over mercy, I said. That's what they taught me. I turned to Leo. You were the sacrifice I made to survive. I'm sorry. But I'm not sorry enough to have made a different choice. The words landed like stones in still water. Leo looked like he might be sick. Victoria remained expressionless. Julian's breathing had changed, steadier now, more controlled. He was processing, calculating. Every piece of evidence in this room, I continued, is admissible in court. The timeline, the payments, the photographs, Catherine's forensic analysis, Hazel's testimony about conversations she witnessed in this house, Vernon's security footage, all of it. I let that settle. Tuesday, you walk into that courtroom and argue I'm incompetent to manage my own affairs. The judge will see a man who survived 4 years of manual labor, who built a case with the precision of someone who understands exactly what competence looks like. And then the judge will see this. I gestured to the evidence table. 3 folders, hundreds of pages, thousands of hours of investigation compressed into documentation that could destroy 3 lives in a single trial. So yes, I said. Now we can talk about Tuesday. The room fell silent. Julian's breathing was the only sound, steady, measured, deliberate. He wasn't broken. He wasn't panicking. He was still looking for the play. I'd shown him every card I held, exposed every piece of Raymond's 20-year conspiracy, proven beyond doubt that I had documented their entire war against me. And Julian was still calculating whether he could win. That told me everything I needed to know about whether this would end peacefully. Julian spent the weekend calculating. I spent it waiting. Monday morning, July 22nd. Cook County Courthouse. Judge Marianne Holt's gavel struck the bench at 9:02 a.m., and Julian's lawyer smiled like a man holding aces 3 minutes before his case collapsed. Judge Holt was 61, 23 years on the bench, known for running an efficient courtroom and tolerating zero theatrics. She looked over her reading glasses at the packed gallery, then at the attorneys seated at their respective tables. Sterling incompetency petition, she said. Let's proceed. Marcus Drummond stood. Julian's defense attorney, 47 years old, sharp suit, sharper reputation. Raymond had recommended him 6 months earlier, and Julian had paid his retainer without question. Drummond had the kind of confidence that came from winning cases other lawyers wouldn't touch. Your Honor. Drummond began. We will demonstrate that Arthur Sterling is mentally incompetent to manage an estate valued at $840 million. Our expert witness, Dr. Craig Blackwell, examined Mr. Sterling on 6 occasions. His findings are conclusive. Julian sat at the petitioner's table relaxed, almost casual. His body language screamed certainty. He believed the next 30 minutes would hand him control of everything I had built. I sat at the defense table beside Wayne Lancaster, watching my son prepare to destroy himself. Call your witness, Mr. Drummond, Judge Holt said. Julian leaned toward Drummond and whispered something. From the movement of his lips, I read, 3 minutes. This'll be over in 3 minutes. Dr. Craig Blackwell entered the courtroom and walked to the witness stand. 64 years old clinical psychologist specializing in geriatric competency evaluations. The bailiff swore him in. Drummond approached with the confidence of a prosecutor who already knew the answers. Dr. Blackwell, you examined Arthur Sterling 6 times over the past 3 months, correct? Correct. And what were your findings regarding his mental competency? Blackwell looked directly at Drummond. Arthur Sterling is perfectly competent. The courtroom went silent. Drummond blinked. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Arthur Sterling demonstrates lucid decision-making, future planning capabilities, and complex financial understanding, consistent with someone managing significant assets. I found no cognitive decline, no impairment, no basis whatsoever for an incompetency determination. Julian's face was drained of color, Drummond stammered. But doctor, your preliminary report indicated... Mom, my preliminary report was based on false information provided by the petitioner. Blackwell interrupted. My formal findings submitted to this court Friday afternoon conclude the opposite. Mr. Sterling is fully competent by every standard measure. Drummond opened his mouth. I closed it. Looked at Julian, who looked like he had been struck. Wayne Lancaster sat beside me, the faintest smile on his face. He said nothing. I didn't need to. The bomb was detonating exactly as planned. Your Honor, Drummond tried, I request a moment to confer with... You may confer after cross-examination, Mr. Drummond, Judge Holt said. Mr. Lancaster. Wayne stood buttoning his jacket with the calm of someone who had been waiting 4 years for this moment. Dr. Blackwell. Wayne said, during your 6 examinations of Mr. Sterling, did anyone attempt to influence your findings? Yes. So could you describe those attempts? Blackwell reached into his briefcase and produced a small digital recorder. Julian Sterling approached me in May, offered $180,000 over 3 meetings for a false diagnosis of mental incompetency. I recorded all 3 conversations with his knowledge of being recorded per Illinois 2-party consent law. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Holt's gavel silenced them. So the recordings are time-stamped and authenticated. Blackwell continued. May 14th, June 2nd, June 27th. Each meeting escalated the offer. Each meeting included explicit instruction on which cognitive deficits to fabricate in my report. Watching your son's face collapse in real time. There's no preparation for that, even when you planned every second of it. Julian's certainty evaporated. His body language shifted from confident to trapped. He looked at Drummond like a drowning man looking for a rope that wasn't there. Drummond sat down, closed his briefcase, understood immediately that his client had destroyed himself and taken the attorney's reputation with him. Catherine Walsh stood from the gallery addressing the court. Your Honor, Catherine Walsh, forensic consultant for the defense. Based on Dr. Blackwell's testimony, we are formally requesting the state's attorney add criminal bribery charges against Julian Sterling under Illinois Statute 720. I'm LCS 5/33-1. The recordings constitute clear evidence of attempted witness tampering and bribery of an expert witness in a judicial proceeding. Judge Holt looked at Julian, then at the recorder still sitting on the witness stand. This court will recess for 30 minutes, she said. Mr. Drummond, I suggest you have a very frank conversation with your client. Bailiff, contact the state's attorney's office immediately. The gavel struck again. Julian sat frozen at the petitioner's table. Around him, the courtroom shifted into motion, attorneys conferring, gallery observers, whispering, court staff moving with purpose. But Julian remained perfectly still, staring at nothing. Then he looked at me, not angry, not defiant, not even the calculating expression he had worn Friday night when I showed him every piece of evidence. This was the look of someone who just realized he lost. Not just the case, not just his freedom, but everything Raymond Cross had promised him over 20 years of careful grooming. Every offshore payment, every whispered strategy session, every assurance that the old man was vulnerable and the victory was certain. All of it was gone in 32 minutes. That look Julian gave me across the courtroom, that's the moment every father dreads and every betrayed man prays for. The moment your child understands they were wrong and the understanding comes too late to matter. I held his gaze, did not look away, did not offer comfort or victory or anything that resembled the satisfaction he might have expected. I just looked back at my son and let him see exactly what 4 years of survival had built. Someone who would sacrifice mercy for evidence. Someone who would watch his own child commit crimes and document every second. Someone who loved his children enough to destroy them rather than let them destroy him. Julian looked away first. Wayne leaned close. State's attorney will file charges by end of day. Bribery witness tampering fraud. Julian's looking at 3 to 7 years if he pleads. More if he fights. And the incompetency petition, I asked. Ted. Holt will dismiss with prejudice within the hour. 4 years. 18 construction sites. 2 pairs of boots. Every utility bill showing a balance that could have broken me. It ended in 32 minutes. But standing in that courtroom watching Julian understand the scope of his defeat, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not vindication, just the hollow recognition that winning this war meant losing my children forever. The courtroom victory was hollow. What came 5 hours later was worse. 2:15 in the afternoon, Wayne Lancaster's conference room on the 40th floor of his law firm. I had invited my children for what I called final settlement terms. They arrived expecting paperwork, legal formalities, perhaps an apology if they were optimistic. The documents on the table looked routine transfer agreements, settlement terms, standard legal boilerplate, until Catherine Walsh turned to page 3 and my children's faces changed. This isn't a settlement," Catherine said, her voice carrying the precision of someone who had spent months building this exact moment. "It's a criminal confession formatted as a corporate agreement." Julian picked up the document, read the header. His expression shifted from confusion to comprehension to horror. Met acknowledgement and conviction agreement. He read aloud. "What is this?" 9 weeks, I said. Every conversation, every transaction, every lie compiled and prosecutable. You wanted my estate. I'm offering you accountability instead. Victoria reached for her copy. Leo stared at his, like it might explode. Eleanor sat in the corner, silent, watching her children realize the trap had already closed. Catherine stood holding a bound document that represented 3 months of forensic investigation compressed into legal charges. Count 1, bribery of an expert witness. Julian Sterling offered $180,000 to Dr. Craig Blackwell for false testimony. We have recordings, timestamps, bank transfer documentation. She turned a page. Count 2, corporate espionage and data theft. Leo Sterling, acting under instruction from Raymond Cross, extracted 14 classified internal documents from Sterling Dynamics servers. Catherine Walsh Financial traced the coordination through offshore communications. Another page. Count 3, conspiracy to defraud and liquidate corporate assets. $800 million sale negotiated by Leo Sterling to Raymond Cross without shareholder approval or board authorization. Shinkaktori, count 4, extortion and coercion. Julian Sterling's incompetency petition filed under false pretenses to force asset transfer under duress. Count 5, criminal trespass and document forgery. Julian Sterling and Victoria Sterling archive room break-in, June 12, 11:38 p.m. to 12:25 a.m. 47 minutes captured on video surveillance. Vernon Henderson, standing by the door, began distributing evidence folders. Each child received documentation of their specific crimes. Photographs, bank statements, surveillance footage, stills, witness affidavits. Julian's folder was thickest. 20 years of payments from Raymond Cross, every offshore account, every laundered consultation fee. Leo's folder contained Serena Archer's employment records, the emails instructing her to establish a relationship with the youngest Sterling, the server logs, showing exactly when those 14 files were copied. Victoria's folder held archive room footage screenshots. Her face was clearly visible. Her hands clearly altered documents. Timestamps proving every second of the crime she thought was invisible. Every timestamp, Vernon said quietly. Every location, every witness statement, authenticated and admissible. Leo's hands shook as he opened his folder. I didn't know it was... I thought we were just... He couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't find words to explain how you accidentally commit espionage, accidentally betray your father, accidentally participate in a conspiracy that destroyed a family. 9 weeks of watching your children destroy themselves, one documented crime at a time. You would think I would feel victorious. I felt like a coroner, like someone cataloging the injuries that killed something I loved. But I kept my face neutral, kept my voice steady. You have 2 options, I said. Sign the acknowledgement, accept responsibility, cooperate with federal prosecution of Raymond Cross, and we negotiate reduced sentences, or refuse and face maximum charges without my cooperation. You can't do this, Victoria said. First words she had spoken since entering the room. You're our father. I said. Before you chose Raymond over blood, before you spent 4 years trying to bury me. Now I'm the man with evidence and you're the defendants. The door opened. 2 federal agents entered. The woman was Sarah Dalton, 43, 12 years, with the Financial Crimes Division, wearing a dark suit and an expression that suggested she had executed hundreds of arrest warrants, and this was simply another Monday. The man was Michael Rhodes, 51, former Chicago Police Department white-collar unit, now federal, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had seen every version of wealthy defendants, realizing they were not above the law. Catherine nodded to them. Confirmation. Julian's face went white. No. You said we had options. I said you could sign and cooperate or refuse and face maximum charges. I interrupted. I didn't say the arrests were optional, Julian erupted. Standing so fast, his chair tipped backward. You know how I lived in your shadow, 20 years suffocating under Arthur Sterling's perfection, 20 years being the son who wasn't good enough, smart enough, ruthless enough to measure up. I met his eyes. I know. I tried to build you a shadow big enough to grow in. You chose to burn it instead. Agent Dalton stepped forward. Julian Sterling, Victoria Sterling, Leo Sterling. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, bribery of a witness, corporate espionage, and criminal trespass. You have the right to remain silent. Julian resisted verbally shouting about lawyers and rights, and his father's betrayal, even as Agent Rhodes cuffed his wrists behind his back. Leo didn't resist. Just stood there crying, shoulders shaking as Agent Dalton cuffed him with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Victoria stood motionless until Agent Rhodes touched her elbow. Then she moved mechanically, extending her hands, allowing herself to be cuffed without protest or emotion. Eleanor pressed herself against the wall, frozen, watching the children she had carried and raised being placed in federal custody. Her face showed nothing. No tears, no anger. Just the blank shock of someone watching something impossible become real. Watching police handcuff your children is like watching a building you built get demolished. You know it has to happen. You signed the demolition order. You called the crew. But every beam that falls still breaks something in you that cannot be repaired. Agent Dalton led Julian toward the door. Agent Rhodes followed with Victoria and Leo. Vernon held the door open. Catherine gathered the evidence folders into her briefcase. Eleanor remained against the wall, watching her family disintegrate in federal custody. I stood at the conference table alone, except for Wayne, who had witnessed the entire execution in silence. "You won," Wayne said quietly. I watched my 3 children disappear through the doorway in handcuffs. "Yes," I said. "It feels exactly like losing." Winning feels exactly like losing until someone reminds you what winning actually cost. 9 days after my children's arrests, a federal prosecutor asked Wayne Lancaster if he knew I had been a billionaire during those construction years. The hearing room was smaller than the courtroom where Julian's case had collapsed. Federal sentencing considerations, they called it. Character testimony to help determine what my children deserved for trying to destroy me. Wednesday, July 31st, 10:47 in the morning. Diane Foster stood at the prosecutor's table. 52 years old, 18 years in the white-collar crime division, wearing a navy suit, and the expression of someone who had seen every variation of wealthy defendants claiming victimhood. She was handling the Sterling Children's criminal case with the efficiency of someone who understood exactly how privilege worked and how rarely it faced consequences. "Mr. Lancaster," she said, "you've testified that you employed Arthur Sterling for 4 years in various construction roles. Could you describe his work ethic?" Wayne sat in the witness box, looking more comfortable than most people did under oath. "He arrived at 6 a.m. every day for 4 years. Read blueprints faster than engineers half his age, carried materials that made younger men quit, never once complained, never once mentioned he'd built a billion-dollar company from nothing." "Did he mention his family?" Diane asked. "Only once," Wayne said. "Asked if I could arrange a direct deposit so he could send money home automatically. I asked how much. He said whatever was left after rent and food." Diane paused. "Did you know Arthur Sterling was a billionaire during this period?" "No, ma'am," Wayne said. "Only knew he was the best builder on my crew. Found out about the company 6 months ago when he hired me as his attorney. By then, I'd already decided he was the kind of man worth defending. The hidden decency of those years, sending money to a daughter who hated me, working jobs that broke my body, never once using my name or history. To make it easier, Wayne's testimony made it real in a way my own memory couldn't." Diane nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Lancaster." She had been trying to paint my children as victims of an entitled father's vindictiveness. Wayne had just destroyed that narrative with the simple truth of 4 years spent proving I could survive without the empire I had built. The hearing adjourned. I thanked Wayne. Went home to my penthouse that felt too large and too empty. Thursday evening, 6:23, Eleanor arrived at Wayne's office where I had been reviewing sentencing recommendations. She looked older than she had 9 days ago. Grief does that. Watching your children get arrested ages you in ways time alone cannot manage. "I need to know something," she said without preamble. "My father, 12 years ago. What actually happened? You want to know the difference between winning in court and winning in life. I had one." Eleanor was about to give me the other. I told her the truth. "Your father wasn't coerced," I said. "He volunteered. Walked into my office and said he'd take responsibility for the regulatory violations because someone had to and he was closest to retirement. I tried to talk him out of it. He insisted. Said it was the right thing to do." Eleanor's hands shook. "You let me hate you for 12 years knowing he chose it." She said, "What was I supposed to say?" I asked. "That your father's sacrifice was voluntary. That makes it worse, not better. He gave up his career to protect the company and its employees. Telling you that would have just made you feel guilty for hating him instead of me. So you took the blame." "I took what I deserved," I said. "He protected my company. I failed to protect him from having to make that choice. Eleanor sat down in the chair across from my desk. The same chair my children had sat in when they were young, asking for advice or money or permission. The chair that had witnessed 30 years of family conversations before everything collapsed. "I blamed you," she said quietly. "Told the children their grandfather died because of your greed. Raised them to see you as someone who sacrificed good people for profit." "I know," I said. "Raymond used that. Built his entire strategy on the foundation of your justified anger." She looked at me. It wasn't justified. It was just anger. I opened my desk drawer, pulled out an envelope I had kept for 9 years, unsealed, unread by anyone except me and the man who wrote it. "Your father sent this 3 years before he died," I said. "I never showed you because I didn't think it would help. Now I think maybe it's the only thing that can." I handed her the letter. She opened it with shaking hands. I knew the words by heart. Had read them hundreds of times in the years since Daniel Marsh died, believing he had failed me. "You did what I didn't have courage to do, rebuild from zero." Eleanor read aloud, her voice breaking. "I took the payout and ran. Comfortable retirement while you lost everything. I'll never forgive myself for being too weak to stand beside you when you needed it most. The sacrifice wasn't taking responsibility. The sacrifice was letting you face the aftermath alone." Eleanor cried. First time since the arrests. First time maybe since her father died. Not quiet tears, but the kind of sobbing that comes from foundations crumbling beneath beliefs you built your life on. "My father never blamed you," she said through tears. "I know," I said. "That's the worst thing. Guilt is heavier when you're forgiven. Forgiveness is supposed to feel like relief. It feels like drowning in what you can never fix. Daniel Marsh forgave me before I even knew I needed forgiving." Eleanor had spent 12 years hating me for something her father chose freely and regretted bitterly. And I had spent those same 12 years letting her hate me, because it was easier than making her understand her father's guilt. "I raised our children to destroy you," Eleanor said. "You raised them to value loyalty," I said. "Raymond just redirected who they were loyal to." "That's generous." "It's true." We sat in the office as daylight faded. The summer sun set late in August, but eventually darkness came. Neither of us moved to turn on the lights. Sometimes the only honest response to truth is sitting together in the dark, letting it settle, accepting that some things cannot be fixed or forgiven or forgotten. They can only be endured. We sat until it was completely dark. Neither of us turned on the lights. Eventually, Eleanor turned on the lights. We didn't speak for another hour. Sometimes darkness teaches you what light cannot. Friday morning, August 2nd, Everett Griffin's 3-part series hit every newsstand in Chicago, 20 Years of Conspiracy in 12,000 words. The headline stretched across the Tribune's front page. 20 years of betrayal, the mastermind behind the shadows, and a billionaire family's fall. Everett Griffin, 59 years old, 22 years in long-form investigative reporting, had spent 3 months building the story. Wayne had given him access to court documents, forensic reports, timeline reconstructions. Everett had interviewed Vernon Henderson, Catherine Walsh, even Hazel Thornton. He had traced Raymond Cross's corporate structures back to their origins, mapped Julian's recruitment. From age 12, documented Serena Archer's planted romance with precision that made it impossible to deny. But the paragraph that made the story unforgettable came on page 4. I read it aloud to Wayne over coffee that morning. For 4 years, billionaire Arthur Sterling wore the same pair of work boots to construction sites across Chicago. By year 3, they were held together with duct tape. He never bought new ones. When asked why, a former crew member said Sterling told him, "These boots carried me this far. They'll carry me home." I set down the paper. Everett made my shoes famous. I don't know whether to laugh or cry. Wayne smiled. He called me last night. Said the boots are the story. Everything else is crime. The boots are redemption. Within a week, Everett's series was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize in investigative journalism. Within 2 weeks, photographs of those duct-taped boots were displayed in the Chicago History Museum as symbols of resilience. I became an icon I never intended to be. Public vindication feels different than courtroom victory. The court proved I was competent. Everett proved I was human. Tuesday, August 6th, 2:47 in the afternoon, my office phone rang. The automated voice said the call was from a federal detention facility. I accepted the charges. Dad. Leo's voice sounded hollow. Detention does that. Strips away everything except what you actually are underneath the privilege. Leo, I'm not calling for forgiveness, he said. I know I don't get that. I'm calling because I need to understand. How did Raymond first approach me? When did it start? I had known this question would come eventually. Had prepared the answer for 4 years. Family party, I said. 7 years ago. You were 21. Raymond cornered you in my study, showed you photographs of me with your mother, before the divorce told you I had destroyed the family for ambition. I was standing outside the door. Heard every word. Silence on the line. I didn't know you knew, Leo finally said. I know. I waited to see what you'd choose. And I chose wrong. Money di chikachu, you chose what Raymond offered, I said. Money, belonging. A version of me that was easier to hate than understand. I don't blame you for choosing. I blame you for never questioning whether the choice was real. How do you answer your son when he asks if you love him from a detention cell you put him in? You tell the truth, love and consequences aren't opposites. They're the same thing with different timelines. Leo's breathing was audible on the line. Then his voice quieter. Do you love us, Dad? I thought about 4 years of construction work. About watching my children destroy themselves while I documented every crime. About choosing evidence over mercy because mercy without accountability is just enabling. I paid $180 million in legal fees, investigator costs, and settlement funds to save you from what Raymond promised, I said. I could have let you burn and kept the money. You figure out what that means. The line went silent. Then a click. Leo didn't call again. But 3 weeks later, Wayne told me Leo had agreed to cooperate fully with federal prosecution of Raymond Cross. Not for reduced sentencing, just because it was the right thing to do. Sometimes understanding is the only forgiveness that matters. Friday evening, August 9th, 7:34, my penthouse terrace overlooking Lake Michigan. Eleanor brought tea. We sat in the chairs I had bought 6 years ago, when I still thought family dinners on this terrace were possible. The silence was different now. Not the silence of things unsaid, but the silence of things already understood. What will you do next? Eleanor asked. Shall Millennium Tower needs completion, I said. Phase 2. Commercial development residential units, public park on the ground floor. I have the capital now. Estate's been returned, assets unfrozen. I could start next month if I wanted. Will you? Depends, I said. Will you stay? Eleanor sipped her tea. Didn't answer. Just looked out over the lake where the August sun was setting, painting the water in colors that made the city look like something worth rebuilding. I stood to refill my cup and noticed the file on my desk. Millennium Tower Phase 2. Cover sheet, project summary, timeline, budget, and Eleanor's signature, dated that morning, 8 hours before I asked if she would stay. Sometimes the most powerful choice is the one you make, before anyone asks. Eleanor understood that better than I ever did. She had spent 12 years waiting for me to destroy myself or be destroyed. When neither happened, when I survived and won and lost and kept standing, she made her choice. Not because I asked, because she decided. I returned to the terrace. Eleanor was still looking at the lake. I sat beside her and said nothing about the signature or the project or the choice she had made that morning before I woke up. The winds from the lake tonight, she said. It is, I said. You always liked that. Said it reminded you of building the first tower, standing on the foundation before the walls went up. Still do, I said. We sat as darkness settled over Chicago. The city lights came on one by one. Millennium Tower visible in the distance, my first creation still standing after everything that tried to tear it down. Somewhere in federal detention, my 3 children were learning what consequences felt like. Somewhere in the shadows, Raymond Cross was facing prosecution for 20 years of conspiracy. Somewhere in the Tribune archives, Everett Griffin's article was being read by people who needed to know that survival was possible. And here on this terrace with Eleanor beside me, and her signature already dry on tomorrow's project, I had everything I needed. Wind blowing from the lake. Eleanor's tea is cooling in her cup. The city we would rebuild together, one foundation at a time. I don't need forgiveness. I don't need revenge. I don't need anything else. Tomorrow's project became today's foundation faster than I expected. Eleanor and I spent Saturday reviewing blueprints. Sunday morning, I learned what forgiveness with legs looks like. Lincoln Park, 9:23 a.m., August 11th. Connor Sterling ran across the grass like forgiveness has legs, 7 years old, untouched by his father's choices, arms wide. Diane Sterling stood by the parking lot watching her son run toward the grandfather whose testimony had put her husband in federal detention. She was 34, Julian's wife for 9 years, Connor's mother for 7. Navigating the aftermath of her husband's crimes while protecting her son from the scandal that had consumed the Sterling name. She had agreed to this unsupervised visit. That alone was grace I had not earned. Connor crashed into me with the force of someone who still believed hugs could fix things. Maybe at 7 they still could. Grandpa. His voice carried across the park. Mommy says we can have ice cream. Does she? I looked at Diane. She nodded, already walking away to give us space. Trust or exhaustion, I could not tell. Either way, I was grateful. Connor and I walked toward the ice cream vendor. His hand in mine felt impossibly small. Julian's son. My grandson. The next generation untainted by Raymond's 20-year conspiracy. And Grandpa, Connor said as we waited in line. Will Dad come back? The question every child asks when a parent disappears. The question that deserves an honest answer, even when honesty is complicated. Your father will face his choices, I said. That takes time, but you're not responsible for those choices. You understand that? Connor looked up at me. 7 years old, already processing concepts that should not exist in a child's world. Mommy says that too, he said. But I still miss him. You should, I said. Missing someone doesn't mean approving what they did. It just means you loved them. We got chocolate ice cream. Sat on a bench overlooking the lake. Connor ate his with the focused intensity of someone for whom ice cream is still the most important thing in the world. And Grandpa, are you sad? He asked between bites. I looked at the sky. Clear blue. Late summer in Chicago before autumn arrives and changes everything. Yes, I said. But sadness doesn't mean defeat. Mommy says you're the strongest person she knows. Your mommy is kind, I said. Strength is just choosing to stand up one more time than you fall down. Connor nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. Maybe 7-year-olds understand more about resilience than we give them credit for. We finished our ice cream. I walked him back to Diane. She looked at me across the parking lot with an expression I could not quite read. Not forgiveness, not condemnation. Just acknowledgement that we were both trying to protect the same child from the wreckage of choices made before he was born. Thank you, I said. Diane nodded. He needs you. Whatever happened between you and Julian Connor deserves his grandfather. They drove away. I stood in the parking lot and felt something shift. The future was not just Eleanor's signature on blueprints. It was Connor's hand in mine. It was Diane's willingness to trust. It was the possibility that some things could be rebuilt even when others remained broken. Sunday night, 10:47, my private study. The envelope had been waiting in my desk for 4 years. My mother's handwriting on the outside, "When everything is over." I opened it. Her handwriting at 83 looked like my own, at 8 proof that time takes everything except the essential shape of who we are. The letter began. I've been silent for 30 years when I should have spoken. I love my children and I love you. I was a coward to both. She wrote about Raymond, about the siblings I had spent my life trying to protect, while one of them spent 20 years trying to destroy me. About her fear that speaking would break a family that was already fracturing. And what I fear most, she wrote near the end, isn't that you won't forgive me. I fear you won't forgive yourself. You did what I didn't have the courage to do. You stood up. You survived. You built and rebuilt and kept building even when they tried to bury you. The final line, "Forgive yourself, Arthur." Behind the letter, a simple drawing. A heart sketched like something a child would make. No explanation, no signature, just the heart. I held the paper and cried for the first time since this ordeal began. Not for my children in federal detention, not for the 4 years of construction work or the conspiracy or the trial, but for my mother who had loved imperfectly and died before she could say these words aloud. Forgiveness, when it finally comes, feels nothing like relief. It feels like permission to set down weight you have been carrying so long you forgot it was not part of your skeleton. Monday morning, August 12th, 7:08 a.m. I arrived at my office on the 40th floor of the building where Eleanor and I had established our new headquarters. Not Sterling Corp., something new, something we would build together. Millennium Tower Phase 2. Blueprints spread across my desk. New project, new beginning, same precision. I picked up my pen, looked through the glass at Chicago's skyline. The city that had watched me rise and fall and rise again. The city that would watch me build one more tower. Every building starts with a single line. Every life rebuilt the same. The precision matters less than the willingness to draw it. I touched pen to paper. Drew the first line of Phase 2, straight, deliberate, exactly where it needed to be. Eleanor entered quietly, placed coffee on my desk. A small paper note attached to the cup, 4 words in her handwriting, the next line. I looked up. She smiled, said nothing. Sat in the chair across from my desk with her own blueprints, her own plans, her own next line to draw. We worked in silence. The kind of silence that only comes after everything has been said and survived and understood. Sometimes justice doesn't come like lightning. Sometimes it comes like a straight line on blank paper, slow, careful, absolutely precise. I drew the second line, then the third. Building something new from the ruins of everything I had lost and won and learned. Connor's hand in mine. My mother's final permission. Eleanor's signature is already dry on tomorrow's foundation. The city stretching out below, full of buildings I had made, and buildings I would make, and spaces still waiting for the next precise line. I picked up my pen and kept drawing. And to you listening to my story, remember, this victory is not always what it looks like from the outside. Looking back now, I wonder if there was a moment I could have chosen differently. A conversation I should have had when my children were young, before Raymond's poison took root. Don't make my mistake of assuming blood loyalty is automatic. Teach it. Model it. Protect it. Because by the time you're documenting your own children's crimes, you've already lost something you can never get back. If you're facing betrayal from your family right now, know this: justice is possible, but it's not free. It cost me 4 years, my relationship with my children, and a version of myself I'll never be again. But I survived. And I believe God put me through this fire so I could tell you, you can survive too. Document everything. Build your case. Stand up when they expect you to fall. These grandpa stories we tell aren't just entertainment. They're lessons carved from real pain, real choices, real consequences. Learn from them. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Did I do the right thing? Would you have handled it differently? Leave your perspective in the comments below. If this story moved, you please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more grandpa stories about resilience, justice, and standing up when life knocks you down, subscribe to Dad's Revenge Stories. Thank you for staying until the very end. I know it was a long journey, but I hope something in it resonated with you. One final note: while this story includes fictional elements for storytelling and learning purposes, the lessons about resilience, family, and standing up for yourself are very real. God bless you.